In this video, we're looking at some of the most disturbing and depraved video games ever made. These games feature horrific scenes with shocking plots and push the limits of what's acceptable in interactive media. We're diving into 100 of the most depraved, spine-chilling, and nightmarishly disturbing games. Let's begin. Grezzo 2. Known in the Doom World forums as the most offensive game, in this bizarre adventure, you embody Piro, a pagan farmer who has set the goal of returning to the past to kill Jesus Christ before his crucifixion and thus prevent the emergence of Christianity. So throughout the campaign, Piro will face the famous contemporaries of Italy in a satirical narrative that mocks the social, political, and religious problems of his country in a rather extreme way by going through psychedelic levels and confronting various bosses who are a reflection of the most important figures of Italian pop culture. The story itself is simple. Piro, unsatisfied with his situation, starts a killing spree in which he is quickly assassinated, reaching the afterlife to be judged by the creator. But Piro, refusing to surrender, decides to fight against Christianity. After killing God and escaping from the afterlife, Piro finds a way back in time and infiltrates the womb of the Virgin Mary, killing Jesus and fertilizing the ovum with his semen to be violently reborn and make Mary explode in front of the three kings. And they watch Piro play the banjo to enjoy his victory. In the words of its creator, Nicola Piro, I really wanted to create a video game that would upset any mother, any religious organization, something vulgar and unheard of. And it seems to have succeeded, because as a result of the graphic violence, sexual content, and its mockery of religion, it received strong media attention, which can only label it as blasphemous and edgy. And in 2015, platforms like Twitch added the title to its list of banned video games, slightly slowing the popularization it was having at the time. In the end, Grezzo 2 is a reflection of its author, who in a later interview stated that Grezzo 2 represents how he sees the world. Quote, "For me, the world is like this. The Pope is obviously a monster, an enemy, and everything is carried in excess." The torture game. You, as the killer, will have at your disposal a series of tools from a harmless paintbrush to a chainsaw to torment this poor person to death. For this reason, the graphics are extremely explicit, allowing the player to tear off the skin of his victim to the point of leaving only the bones to split him in half or just hurt him to the brink of death to start over again. Your victims are simply hanging there waiting for you. Meanwhile, the game's ragdoll physics lend a sickeningly hypnotic charm to the whole affair. With every touch of your cruel hand, every cut of the chainsaw, your victim sways, bounces, and dances like some fleshy marionette. A sadistic fantasy that aims to be visually stunning by having the player perform acts so abhorrent they would make Norman Bates blush. Autopsy Ward. Autopsy Ward is a very particular eroge from the early days of the internet developed by the user Gimmick Action and published in now forgotten Japanese forums. In this game, you play the role of a mad doctor who has started a series of sadistic experiments with his assistants, activities ranging from mutilation, psychological torture, electroshocks, and much more. Most of these acts being extremely cruel because throughout all the sessions to which we submit the two unfortunate girls, they will beg you to stop, giving you the game option to do so. However, to get all the interactions, at some point, the player must carry out the atrocious acts that deform the poor test subjects to leave them unrecognizable and begging for death. Undoubtedly, one of the most unpleasant experiences I've had in a long time. Although it went unnoticed, and on the internet you can barely find information about the game, there are some flash replicas scattered in some pages, and the full version is currently for sale and completely legal under Japanese jurisdiction, which has allowed the author to develop a saga of games that maintain the same level of sadism and 845. In this virtual reality simulation, the player controls an unnamed office worker going about his daily routine until the building begins to shake, spreading panic as the lights begin to go out. They are warned about the slowly encroaching fire. They are trapped in the darkness of the floor after every door is tested and is jammed. They are trapped within these confines. They hear as their coworkers make phone calls to their families saying their final goodbyes as smoke fills the room. The man breaks open a window to the outside, revealing that they are in the North Tower of the World Trade Center during the 9/11 attacks, eventually forcing the player to make a decision between dying from smoke inhalation or jumping out a window and falling to their death. This peculiar experience was developed for educational purposes of the event, trying to be as realistic as possible, sparking some controversy about how to relate to this kind of event. although Anthony Kraft, creative director of the project, defended his presentation. He said that it was a student project in which 6 students collaborated for 3 months and that the purpose was to make a tribute to all the victims of those attacks, which is why it was free and downloadable for all players. Waxworks. Waxworks is a horror first-person dungeon crawl video game developed by Horrorsoft and released in 1992 for Amiga, Macintosh, and DOS. Inspired by the 1988 film Waxworks, it is a game of exploration and puzzle solving. The game is divided into 5 time periods: Ancient Egypt, Medieval Transylvania, Victorian England, an Industrial Mine period, and Ixana's period. The story focuses on a family curse, in which for 5 generations, twins were always born, one good and one extremely evil. Luckily, these twins were locked in wax molds, which have become portals that will take the protagonist through the various parts of the game to stop the evil that plagues his family. In this journey, the protagonist faces supernatural beings and grotesque murderers that will put his life at risk. In each time period, the player moves through a series of tight corridors using a bitmap, sprite-based point-and-click interface, picking up items, solving puzzles, avoiding traps, and engaging in combat with various opponents. During combat, players can target their opponent's individual body parts, such as the head or the arms. The main objective is to collect a special item from each of the evil twin ancestors before venturing into the Ixana period to undo the family curse. Belong Nowhere. Belong Nowhere is a surreal, twisted, and beautifully drawn body horror adventure set in a nightmarish land with lots of horrible ways to die. The city of Monogorsk used to be a quiet place, or at least habitable. The snow always falls on the streets, and the sun is barely visible behind the black clouds of the factories. It seems to be just another town in the distance, until a parasite arrived, and without warning, turned the streets into a living nightmare full of monsters and mutated humans who live in eternal suffering, only to feed on others, turning the city into complete chaos, from which Matvey, one of the few survivors, will try to escape. He will also find a way to get rid of the parasite that lives inside him and tries to eat him. Similar to other titles like Fear and Hunger, everything is hostile and the slightest carelessness can be deadly, having to manage your resources to cope with the countless creatures that want to feed on your flesh. Enveloping the player in a surreal and dirty environment, along with an excellent sound design, makes the player kept on permanent alert, and believe me when I say that you will never feel safe. Hansel and Gretel Flash Game. Inspired by the original version of the Grimm Brothers story, this point-and-click adventure game is developed by Mako Pudding and originally published on Newgrounds in 2009. You have the opportunity to control Gretel, who has been trying to escape from her parents who have decided to kill their children during the winter. Throughout the adventure, you will have to take care of your younger brother from the dangers of the house and the forest while solving a series of mini-games and to unlock one of the 10 available endings. However, if you fail, Gretel will die in various ways, each one more painful than the previous one. D no Shokutaku. D no Shokutaku, D for short, is a horror-themed interactive movie and adventure game developed by Warp and directed by Kenji Ino. It was first published by Panasonic for 3DO in 1995, later being ported to the Sega Saturn, PlayStation, and MS-DOS. The story follows Laura Harris as she goes to investigate a hospital after learning her father went on a mass murdering spree and barricaded himself inside. The hospital morphs into a castle upon her arrival, which she must explore to find her father. The player controls Laura through computer-generated full-motion video, FMV, sequences, and must complete the game within 2 hours without a save or pause function. Taking place in 1997, the story begins when Laura Harris is contacted by Los Angeles police, receiving a disturbing message. Her father, Dr. Richter Harris, director of the Los Angeles National Hospital, has gone on a mass murdering spree and barricaded himself in the hospital. Laura rushes to the scene of the crime, desperate to find an explanation for the well-respected doctor's actions. Upon entering the hospital, she is so horrified at the murdered bodies lying about the halls that she covers her eyes. When she uncovers them again, she finds herself in an unknown medieval castle. Unwilling to give up her search, Laura continues through the dark corridors of the castle. While attempting to find her father, she experiences a series of flashbacks of her mother being stabbed to death. Laura's father warns her to leave, saying that staying too long means being stuck in the alternate reality forever. He warns that he will soon become an emotionless monster and will eventually try to kill her. Still shaken, Laura proceeds to find her father, revealing that they both descend from a long vampire lineage. Free Ice Cream. Free Ice Cream is an old-school horror game developed in Flash, which was one of the first games to touch extremely sensitive topics in the Newgrounds page. In this short point-and-click experience, we will play Lily and her best friend, who are attracted by an old van with the free ice cream sign. The girls innocently go to the ice cream man, but as soon as they approach, they are quickly kidnapped by a man of macabre appearance. Immediately, the girls appear in a basement and are tied with several ropes, and from there, they will have to solve a series of puzzles throughout the house to escape as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, on the way there, Lily does not survive, revealing that the ice cream man is a cannibal who enjoys the youngest and softest flesh of the children. So in order not to suffer the same fate as Lily, her best friend is forced to leave her body behind. Can Your Pet? Can Your Pet is a Flash game created by Korean developer GameAid, released around 2010. Here, you will be in charge of the care of a little yellow chicken, which you will see hatching from the egg. You can assign a name and use accessories to begin to form a bond of friendship while you dedicate yourself to feed, play, and bathe him. As the chick grows, you begin unlocking new accessories like a ball and other items that you can equip during the adventure. And of course, like any pet simulator, your main goal is the happiness of your little and adorable chicken, and having to make sure he stays healthy doing exercises with various games until he is an adult and can finally go out into the outside world. So take a bike and go for a ride with him. After that, your beloved pet turns into a can of food and you'll return to the main menu. Although now your pet's spirit will look right at you as you continue to play. An internet classic that some may remember from the old PewDiePie videos. Simple and effective. This is a good way to approach horror, and if you know someone who hasn't played this title, it could be a good joke to make their day. Flesh, Blood, and Concrete. Flesh, Blood, and Concrete, a Russian indie game available online since October 2021, is the first, and so far only video game, produced by the young amateur developer Latatlin. After a car accident on an isolated Russian highway, all Lara can do is seek shelter or help in one of the nearly abandoned apartment buildings that surround her. Following the presence of a mysterious but friendly young woman in an old school uniform, she encounters a building that, under the guise of cozy normality, invites her into its inevitable depths. Among inorganic concrete walls covered with mold and dust from years of neglect are labyrinths in what should have been simply a shelter from the cruel cold wind, as well as rooms that recreate a lost past, throbbing corridors built out of flesh and organs that seem to salivate in your proximity with the tragic decision between returning to the outside world or simply accepting this new home. With certain influences that might associate it with the Utsugi category or just tragic games in general, and with a minimalist gameplay where the major effect on its narrative depends on the answer to a particular question, the story of Lyra and a cheerful, perhaps too cheerful, Nika is one that captures in a mixture of horror and peace synonymously with the emotional state of facing and accepting one's mortality in the worst of circumstances. Under what seems an inevitable conclusion, we are invited to be consumed in warm nostalgia, with dreams of happy times, or futile attempts to face the present, cruel as it may be. Cruelty Squad. A fast, sickening, and visually aberrant experience with a somewhat obtuse design with overly saturated colors clashing with each other, and created by a group of developers that designed the game during an acid trip in order to achieve that delirious and relentless feeling that reflects the state of the economy and violence in today's world. This cyberpunk world is so bizarre that you can even harvest your victims' organs and sell them on the stock market to upgrade your equipment in this cybernetic war, in which you can even implant more cybernetic upgrades that make everything even more visceral. This thing is so strange that it can cause you physical dizziness and a certain sensation with that oppressive sound design that go hand in hand with very dense themes between the corporate war that is being waged in the future with technology so advanced that it is able to revive the dead, constantly making you feel like you're on an acid trip. It is a highly surreal tactical immersive sim first-person shooter with deliberately garish, eye-melting aesthetics, excessively bit-crushed and auditory pieces and trippy visuals influenced by underground, ultra-violent, low-poly video games from the late 1990s to early 2000s. The plot, as explained by the game, is that you are a depressed loser of an assassin who was recently discharged from a government death squad, and a friend of yours offers you a job in the gig economy, doing the only thing you're good at, killing people, Welcome to Cruelty Squad, my friend. For your own punishment and pleasure, you will be killing insane corporate executives, dirty cops, and other assorted social trash for a measly grand per head. Gameplay boils down to this. Your victim, or victims, are somewhere in the level, and you need to go in, kill them, and escape to beat the level. Enemies' weapons will eviscerate you in seconds, and yours do likewise to them. A disempowerment to a guns-blazing approach that highlights an immersive sim influence. Stealth and avoiding combat are just as valuable as being powerful in fights. As such, it's up to the player to figure out how they want to solve each level with an expanding assortment of guns and technological augments, enabling each player to take a unique approach to the game's challenges. The player chooses their weaponry and equipment before starting each of the 19 missions present in the game, and then must traverse open sandbox-style levels to locate and neutralize the targets. Health loss during combat can be regained by using certain equipment, consuming cooked giblets, or even eating corpses should the player die enough times on a level. Power in Misery, the easiest difficulty level. While there is no penalty for killing civilians during a mission, silent and non-lethal solutions are also possible outside of the necessary killing of targets. During missions, the player can harvest organs from corpses as well as go fishing. Then they can trade those organs and fish on a dynamic stock market for money or explore Cruelty Squad's headquarters. The Grudge. Ju-On the Grudge, known in Japan as Kyofu Taikan Ju-On, is a survival horror video game developed for the Wii. It was produced in honor of the Ju-On series' 10th anniversary. The game was directed by Takashi Shimizu, who also helmed the films. The game was developed by FeelPlus and published in Japan by AQ Interactive on July 30th, 2009, and in North America and Europe in October of the same year by Xseed Games and Rising Star Games, respectively. The game is centered on a family that moved into a cursed house. Several family members are playable characters, and each story is viewed from the perspective of the character, being played in scenarios called episodes. The Wii Remote is used to direct the player character's flashlight. However, rather than using the controller's infrared functionality, the game uses the Wii Remote's accelerometer to guide the on-screen tool. Movement is executed by the Wii Remote's control pad and B button, and the character is steered in the direction their flashlight is being held. The player is pressured not to remain in the same place for too long or move too slowly, as this will cause Kayako, the Onryo, to appear to the player. If there is a second Wii Remote synced to the console in the game's Courage test, each of the buttons on that controller can be used to trigger a unique scenario for the player to experience. The game also features a mechanic that measures the Wii Remote's movements during gameplay, so that the more the player flinches, the worse their success rate becomes. LSD Dream Emulator. This video game was released only in Japan for the Sony PlayStation 1 in the late 90s. Only almost 2 decades after its release, it gained cult popularity on the internet, thanks to the unpredictability of its gameplay and its mysterious symbolism. It is based on Lovely Sweet Dream, a dream diary that Hiroko Nishikawa, one of its developers, had been making for about 10 years and was made in conjunction with multimedia artist Osamu Sato, who was in charge of the concept and art direction of the project. This is one of the oldest video games, which uses procedural generation to create millions of different paths, this being the fundamental mechanics of the game. It is used to randomize the contents that the player can find and explore in the game. Each generation is formed from all the player's previous decisions. It is like a scenario with all the information about the current dream, its future links, the appearance of objects, the current position of the stars, the clouds, the suns and moons in the sky, the music, the textures, the final graphic result, and the video graphic content of the non-playable days. In this way, it is possible that each game session is unique and that there are almost an infinity of bizarre and incomprehensible possibilities for the human eye. In LSD, there are no tutorials, no objectives, no scores, no dialogues. It is simply an invitation to explore a virtual world of dreamlike environments, vibrant colors, psychedelic textures, and strange videos. The experience is divided into days, referring to the diary entries that function as levels that follow one after the other. Within each one, there are many unusual environments that can be walked or run through. At the same time, if the player bumps into walls or objects, he or she will be instantly transported to another environment through a system called links. Kiss or Kill. A game with a particular development originally planned for the Dreamcast by the creator Yoshihiro Takahashi in 1998, its development was interrupted by the abrupt discontinuation of the console. but was completed 21 years later by the son of its original creator. We are facing a title that ranges from the absolute minimalism of the rest, like Pong or Pac-Man, to the first overhead perspective RPG through the shmups, but all passed under a filter of punk and disastrous aesthetics. All this is combined with a multitude of effects that are not only there for pure evocation, but end up serving as a tool to get the player out of his mind, with all kinds of glitches and distractions. All this is combined with several video inserts in which we see the creator of the game staging the creation of the following levels of the game, and even making an appearance on the screen to laugh at our failures. Before starting to play, we will have to choose between kissing or shooting, which will lead us to some variations in the course of our game, and finally to different conclusions. The game starts off more or less normal, with levels in which we will have to overcome a path halfway between puzzle and shooter, where shooting is combined with mechanics to slow down or speed up time. Of course, all this is seasoned with irritating music, waifus, psychedelic distortions, and hallucinatory cinematics. With the passage of the levels, which will take us to scenarios similar to the first Zelda, and countless combinations of shooters from bullet hell to gallery shooters, always with incorrect and changing mechanics, in the last stages, we will find ourselves having to decide whether to kill or kiss bosses with the face of Saddam Hussein, and overcome levels in which the mechanics and the very form of our protagonist constantly change. Just how much of what Mr. Takahashi Sr. envisioned is left here, no one can know. But what we do know is that this psychedelic adventure can either be a headache or one of the most enjoyable experiences you can try, depending on your definition of fun. Time Slaughter. Released in 1996 for the DOS, Time Slaughter is a fighting game made by the largely comedic Bloodlust Software. With a very simple but violent history, scientist William Spade is very close to completing a fully functional time machine, but has little time to celebrate when 4 members of a race of time-worshipping demons known as the Takar pay him a visit. Stain, the Dreg, the Surgeon, and the Butcher torture Spade within an inch of his life after he refuses to surrender the time machine before its completion. After losing both arms and his left eye, Spade manages to activate the time machine with his nose, sending the Takar back to where they came from, but causes a huge rip in the time stream in the process due to prematurely activating the machine. As a result, combatants from unique time periods are zapped randomly from place to place, each with their own reason to fight, none of them knowing where they will go next. Spade rebuilds his body, renaming himself Portal, and is now more than ready to defend himself from anyone who might be warped to his plane of existence, including the Takar. This fighting game follows the traditional approach: select your character, fight each opponent for the best out of 3 rounds, and work through a hierarchy of opponents. The fighting is done with punching, kicking, jumping, and specialty moves unique to each available character. The player has 10 characters to choose from, 3 types of punching, 3 types of kicking, 4 to 5 specialty moves, and finally, 1 slaughter move. Red Hood's Woods. Keeping the tradition of the previous video, this is one of those reinventions of the original story of Little Red Riding Hood that twists the original concepts to generate fear. This Arrow game is a prequel to the game Black Souls. For starters, don't think that you're going to be bringing grandma a basket full of goodies. Red Hood's Woods takes a lot of liberties here, and it's more like an original story that's inspired by Little Red Riding Hood than an adaptation. In Red Hood's Woods, you play as Red Hood, a depressive, emotionless, and surprisingly smug, lowly version of the classic character. In this story, Little Red Riding Hood grew up under the care of her grandparents in a seemingly quiet house in a fantasy world. However, her grandfather took advantage of the situation to abuse her frequently. So, in a desperate attempt to get rid of that situation, she would murder her grandfather and give his flesh to a wolf, which acquires the ability to speak and gratefully follow the girl during her adventure through this fantasy land, while escaping from her grandmother, who is seeking to kill her in revenge. Throughout her adventure, Little Red Riding Hood and the wolf will face curses, knights, and dark kings who have been possessed by the Void, a mystical force that has corrupted the gods of the region and freed their brothers all over the world. These being the eldritch beasts and demons that guard each level and function as bosses that the player must successfully face to survive, or else Little Red Riding Hood will be raped by all these creatures and subsequently killed. All this adventure culminates with Little Red Riding Hood and the wolf returning to the grandmother's house, who has finally gathered enough willpower to kill her granddaughter, unleashing one of the most difficult battles of the game. But if you can overcome this encounter, you'll finally return to the real world, in which for the first time throughout the game, you can feel a glimmer of hope for a better tomorrow after the greatest carnage that the universe has ever seen. However, the adventures that await this character will be increasingly more and more horrible and bloody. Lil Bleed. Developed for the Sega Dreamcast, this game has been forgotten by the general public due to the early discontinuation of the console, but despite the passage of time, it has become a hidden gem of survival horror. In this game, a famous media mogul has issued a challenge. He will award $1 million to anyone who can get out of his latest horror theme park, Lil Bleed, alive. You are Aiko, the brave young president of the local high school horror club. Your mission is to rescue your 3 friends at Lil Bleed, the most dangerous attraction in the country. With the park full of bullies, zombies, ghouls, and other horror movie denizens, you must use all your senses to escape death, either from a horrible creature or out of sheer fear. Meters of your senses, such as hearing, sight, and smell, are offered to help you avoid trouble, and there's even a meter for an otherworldly sixth sense. Players find themselves exploring a horror amusement park where they must use a combination of skills and tools to survive a series of chilling horrors as you alternate between 4 characters to complete levels, in addition to using a tool called the Horror Monitor that drains the player's adrenaline. Also, the player can mark various suspected trap locations. These traps burn, cut, scare, and shock the player in different ways, resulting in blood loss, increased pulse, and low stamina. If the player fails to keep the character alive throughout the level, they must be revived out of the level and must continue the level with another character. If the character runs out of players, the game ends, without the option of loading a checkpoint and having to restart the game from the beginning. The Cat Lady. This is an adventure game created by indie developer Remigiusz Michalski and released by Harvester Games on December 7, 2012. The game tells the story of Susan Ashworth, a lonely woman who lives surrounded by cats. With no family, no friends, and no hope, Susan Ashworth is the Cat Lady. She lives alone in her apartment, but despite her nickname, she has no cats. The only cat she has contact with, apart from a clockwork cat that wags its tail every second and seems to mark the rhythm of her days, will be those that come to her house when she plays the piano. Her neighbors do not speak to her, she has no friends, and nothing seems to go well in her life. Not even her own suicide, which the game begins, and that instead of ending in death, will take us to a strange dream world where we will meet an old woman who calls herself Queen of Maggots. She will be the one who will urge us to carry out a mission consisting of killing 5 people whom she calls parasites, and who always, in the words of the old woman, intend to kill us. Almost reluctantly, Susan will accept the mission entrusted by the old woman. Alive again, Susan wakes up in a psychiatric hospital to discover that her world has entered a dreamlike spiral in which it is difficult to know what is real and what is a product of mental illness or drug use, and through which parade strange characters, some with good intentions, others with not so good, and others who are definitely not what they seem to be. As part of the mission, we will have to solve the different puzzles that the scenarios and the argument gives us, while we find useful objects to solve them, and chat with different characters that populate this lucid nightmare. The tone of the story is sometimes extremely somber. The characters talk about suicide, depression, loneliness, or terminal illnesses throughout this story, in which the situations, attitudes, and reflections, although told in a surrealistic way, are often painfully real. The game is linked to a rather murky art that plays with black and white just to highlight the dirtiest and most horrible colors, created based on poorly animated illustrations. The Exit 8. This is a first-person psychological horror adventure in which you are trapped in the endless corridors of a Japanese subway station. Surrounded by white tiles and a cold illumination and crossing with a few and inexpressive people, we have to walk and observe attentively everything around us, looking for the so-called anomalies. If you find any of them, you must go back and run away. If not, you must continue forward to finally reach the exit. Lamondo.com. This is a website apparently created in 2007 by someone known under the pseudonym Shizen Kanaren. The page opens with some illustrations of a Neko girl. However, when you click anywhere on the page, it triggers a screamer in which a woman starts screaming. This is when most people go for the surprise and the scare. However, the site contains more behind that and has entire sections full of mysterious puzzles, screamers, minigames, and even RPG-like battles. There are several sections of the game that have yet to be discovered due to the vastness of the site. Once you complete the game, you fight a monstrous clown with superpowers called Pai Yama God, and upon defeating him, you will reach the gallery where you can witness bonus extra content and relive all the experiences you had on the site beforehand. The game's story touches on dark themes such as depression or suicide, and eventually, the site was discovered in the West, where a creepypasta was created around it, saying that it had produced many suicides in Japan and that the page was cursed, which increased the morbid curiosity for the site. Due to the rise in popularity of the site, an English version of it has recently been launched. The website originally worked with Flash, but due to the discontinuation of that program, it was recreated using more appropriate technologies for modern times, such as HTML5, JavaScript, PHP, etc. Kamaitachi no Yoru, Banshee's Last Cry. Kamaitachi no Yoru is an adventure, crime, mystery, and horror visual novel created by Chunsoft. It was originally released in Japan in November 1994 for the Super Famicom. The game takes place in Nagano, where an ordinary college student named Toru Yajima is invited to go to a ski lodge by Mari Kobayashi, a girl he has a crush on. The two were enjoying their vacation when suddenly a huge snowstorm took place. Afterwards, one of the lodge guests was killed. What makes things worse is that due to the huge snowstorm, no one can make contact to the outside world for law enforcement assistance, forcing the guests to find out who's the culprit and the person's motive before everyone is killed. An inventive twist on the traditional novel, Banshee's Last Cry allows readers to make decisions, each unlocking several unique stories and endings. Added to the mix is a soundtrack befitting a thriller novel and images to set the mood. The game never really comes out and tells you the answer, no matter what path you pursue, but it'll often cleverly hint at things indirectly. You'll have to put together a lot of these indirect, unrelated clues to figure things out. Swallow the Sea. This free title, designed by Maceo Bob Mayer and Nicolas Delgado, takes us to an underwater scenario that refers to the dark recesses of a science fiction and horror story. Incarnating a small and fragile egg-shaped creature, the player must face the relentless struggle for survival in an ecosystem where danger lurks in every corner. Although the controls may be somewhat clumsy in certain circumstances, they are well suited to the underwater setting proposed by Swallow the Sea. The claustrophobia generated by the narrow tunnels and caves contributes to the oppressive atmosphere of the game, emphasizing the feeling of vulnerability to the threats of the environment. The premise of Swallow the Sea is simple, but masterfully executed. As we go deeper into the sea, the need to consume smaller organisms in order to grow and evolve becomes apparent. On screen, an indicator shows us the progress towards the next metamorphosis, whose objective is none other than to reach the top of the food chain. Surviving is a constant challenge, and each stage of transformation increases the challenge by requiring larger amounts of food to advance. Visually, the title shares similarities with Perfect Vermin by presenting creatures with grotesque designs that could be described as true masterpieces of horror. Every enemy, every corner of this world seems to have been carefully molded to convey that sense of unease that is so familiar and, at the same time, so disturbing. The art becomes one more narrative element, driving the psychological horror that goes beyond the easy scares that maintain this cruel and savage line of nature which has no mercy. Not even with the player. Even when he achieves his goal and manages to evolve, the time will come when our luck runs out and everything ends, as the cycle of life indicates. Happy Game. Happy Game is a point-and-click adventure game developed by Amanita Design. The game follows the story of a little boy who falls asleep in a nightmare and needs to be rescued from it. The game is set in 3 different nightmares, from which the player needs to escape, in a bizarre journey filled with deeply disturbing puzzles that need to be solved to advance. The game's challenging puzzles are set in enchanting environments that contrast sharply with the game's horror theme. The game features suspicious smiley faces and pink bunnies that add to the game's eerie atmosphere. The goal is to explore the protagonist's nightmares in diaphanous spaces in 2 dimensions with very few elements to interact with and an important aesthetic power that stems from that same minimalism to tell us about the terror of the unknown while meeting a series of grotesque characters while we chase a ball, a doll, and our little dog. 3 elements that we have to recover to return happiness to the protagonist. We are going to live a disturbing experience that does not cut it for a second when it comes to showing us blood, mutilations, and other type of unpleasant situations you can imagine. All this with an impeccable technique that not only perfectly understands the style of the game, but also knows how to pick up references from different subgenres of horror and adapt them to a very peculiar drawing, which leaves us with some of the most visually original levels that we have seen in recent times. Detention. Detention is an atmospheric horror and adventure video game developed and published by Taiwanese independent studio Red Candle Games, released in January 2017. In Detention, players take the role of two students, Wei and Ray, in 1960s Taiwan under martial law, trapped in their school, which has been transformed into a dark and spooky supernatural realm filled with terrifying creatures and puzzles. As players explore the abandoned school and its surroundings, they must solve puzzles and avoid supernatural horrors to uncover the story behind the transformation of the place and the dark secrets of the characters. A standout feature of the game is its oppressive atmosphere, enhanced by a haunting soundtrack and visual art inspired by the aesthetics of Asian culture and folklore. Detention also stands out for its focus on narrative that tackles different themes, such as political repression, guilt, and regret. By far, the story and visuals are the strengths of this game. Horror lies in the personal and political and how they both interact, as Ray's struggles at home with her drunken, cheating father and her grooming by a teacher merge with the brutal regime of martial law and books being burned in the schoolyard. Both at home and at school, people have a tendency to be taken away by the military if they step out of line, and the same tension and fear pervade the haunted school. Purgatorium. Another oldie but goodie, this Flash game from ages past shows us that atmosphere can be created and scares can be found in the most unlikely of places. The player suddenly awakens in an old house with no idea where they are or how they got there. All that is in front of them is an ominous rocking chair and a seemingly abandoned crib. It is the player's task to look around the room for clues to understand why they were brought there and what grim fate befell the family that lived there. Purgatorium is one such horror Flash game that found a home on Newgrounds. This brief point-and-click adventure tasks you with escaping a room. Rest assured, there are plenty of horrific and creepy visuals perfectly placed throughout in order to generate the maximum amount of fear from you. Silt. Silt is a minimalist underwater adventure developed by Spiral Circus. Silt is a game that offers us the opportunity to dive into an ocean of black and white where there is always a bigger fish. While you move through the depths, you are only allowed two actions, turning on your diving lantern and, most importantly, possessing the sea creatures that you will find. The vast majority of Silt's puzzles revolve around this mechanic, as each of the creatures on the seabed has a unique ability that we must take advantage of to progress. For example, we can possess small fish to sneak through spaces where the diver can't fit, or possess a piranha to cut metal chains. This is a puzzle adventure in which each room is an enigma to solve. Both the visual and sound style generate a certain sense of anxiety and terror, as well as a lot of mystery. The designs of environments and creatures make us see the most enigmatic side of the seabed, an unknown place, forgotten, and full of secrets. The Graveyard. The Graveyard is a computer art game developed by Belgian Tale of Tales. In this contemplative adventure, you play as an old woman visiting a cemetery. It's a 10-minute scene that can be described as more of an explorable painting than a real game. You can have her walk forward, backward, or turn, instantly making the connection deeper and more powerful than it would have been if you were just simply watching. One very specific reason for this is that by controlling the woman, you immediately understand how old and frail she is. She hobbles convincingly toward the bench, which seems very far away. After a few steps, she can't keep up the pace on her bad leg, so she starts limping, leaning on her cane for support. By the time she makes it to the bench, you're glad to be able to just sit down and rest. Soon after you do, the scene starts up. The woman's face comes into clear view, and we see the deep wrinkles and the roughly chopped hair. She listens to the song playing in her mind, looking over the gravestones, thinking about all the different ways that she's seen people die. Much like how the close-up of her face is superimposed over the shot, images of the gravestones you've passed by start appearing. Then, without warning, her head snaps forward and rolls lifelessly in front of her as her shoulders slump. She sits on the bench, dead. The close-up of her face was still superimposed, but now it was a close-up of the back of her neck, as it craned grotesquely forward. Dujana. In this unique proposal that seeks to relate the role of women in Islamic society, we will attend a somewhat special adventure in Dujana, in which the narration will intermingle visual and sound elements to transport us to a sensory experience, which, according to its author, seeks to create debate and conversation about today's world. Dujana will show us images and scenarios generated according to our decisions, something that can lead us to multiple endings. Its creator, King Spooner, makes a truly artistic proposal that mixes claymation with pictures, paintings, drawings, and other visual options that create a dreamlike and difficult to understand scenario, in addition to the cultural clash between Western and Eastern civilization, manifesting a vortex into the unknown. And advancing in the adventure can be shocking and even uncomfortable, given what's proposed on screen. This story begins when Dujana is searching for her family through a fictional Islamic country covered in video-static haze. Her husband and daughter went out a week ago to bury the family hamster, but were killed in the middle of nowhere for no reason by one of the country's occupying armies. Dressed in flowing robes and a face-covering niqab, she visits her neighbor Ted to borrow the keys to Duck, his oil-drilling robot, and pilots it out to the desert for answers. Dujana's quest takes her to a jingoistic military base, an underground lab where a recluse builds an army of suicidal robots in order to better understand death, and a village full of rock venues and spider people. Dujana's search feels like a dream, a series of images linked thematically, but not in any consciously sensical manner. The people she meets are soft, vague clay figures. Their featureless faces seem to be turned inward as they muse aloud about their thoughts. The authorities, who might have some insight into what's happened to her family, are bizarre grotesques made of tumorous growths or bits of broken electronic equipment. This grotesquerie escalates until Dujana meets the men in charge, the men who may be responsible for her misery. In doing so, the game grapples directly with itself and with being viewed. Characters muse about authenticity. A woman dreams of cracked cell phone screens. Robots contemplate their own existence, aware of the fact that they were programmed to do so. The game accepts the player's gaze and gazes back. It's occasionally distracting. For example, at one point, a humanoid spider wonders aloud whether an arcade game about Muslim theology can effectively communicate its message despite being made by an outsider for a non-Muslim audience. All of this turns this title into a journey of religious discovery and an ode to femininity. Deep Sleep. You can't escape your dreams in this haunting, classic point-and-click horror game. An unseen researcher, fascinated by lucid dreaming, constructs a world in his mind to explore. However, his dream world quickly transforms into a nightmarish landscape, trapping him within. A mysterious phone call urges the researcher to wake up and search for a lighthouse that supposedly leads to freedom. Shadowy figures haunt the dream world, relentlessly pursuing and attempting to capture him. To progress, the researcher must unlock doors throughout the building they're confined in. In a dark room located in a long hallway, he discovers numerous news clippings, revealing that others have also ventured into this nightmare realm and have encountered enigmatic events. Near the end of the game, shadowy figures start to appear and will advance towards the researcher. He has to escape the figures as they cannot be killed. The researcher eventually reaches the lighthouse, but is cornered by the shadow figures after restoring the lighthouse lamp. But by turning the light on them, he appears to banish them. The game concludes as the player wakes up. However, curiosity remains, and the researcher expresses his desire to revisit the world of the shadow figures. The best way to describe this game would be basic but effective, immersing you in a claustrophobic environment beyond your control. The only hope of surviving the shadow people rests in your ingenuity to solve the various puzzles that the dream world uses to keep you trapped. Kaboom, the suicide bombing game. Kaboom is a computer game in which the player assumes the role of a suicide bomber who is trying to kill as many people as possible. The player controls an Arab terrorist along a busy street to try to get as close as possible to civilians, then clicking the mouse. The bomber opens his coat to reveal grenades strapped to his body before exploding in a shower of bloody limbs. The more men, women, and children are injured, the more points the player receives. The chairman of the Commons Home Affairs Select Committee, Keith Vaz, said the game contained an unnecessary level of violence and offended relatives of those killed by suicide bombers. The Israeli embassy in London is also understood to have complained. Scores of Israeli citizens have been killed by suicide bombers in recent years, but the creator of the game, an anonymous man from Houston, Texas, dismissed the criticisms. On the website where the game originates, he has written his intention to satirize suicide bombers, not to glorify them. Mouthwashing. Undoubtedly the indie horror experience of the year, and the most charismatic experience that brings a freshness to the genre through a non-linear narrative and a constant desperation that will keep you on the edge of your seat throughout the game. The game starts off by showing us how the pilot of a ship, a cargo ship, we'll find out a little later, deliberately crashes into an asteroid. The crew, 5 people in total, survive, but they are trapped in the ship after a crash landing, unable to go outside because of the risk of generating a lack of oxygen if they open a hatch to the outside. After a while, with no sign of getting out of there, they decide to open the ship's freighter to find out what they were transporting. With its low poly aesthetics and its particular graphic design, Mouthwashing makes us move between the present and the past constantly. Sometimes we will be witnessing a scene from, for example, 2 days before the ship crashed, and sometimes one from 3 months later. That back and forth doesn't make it difficult to understand the story, but it is a bit conscious of how it is presented to us. There are twists that the game saves until the end, and that change our conception of the characters. In addition, the changes between scenes are abrupt, happening almost always in places or moments that we don't expect, leaving half a conversation or a moment clearly vital to understand what has happened there. Mouthwashing is a tense game full of psychological horror and, above all, body horror. But there are no scars or anything like that. It is an experience in which, above all, we do not feel in control of what is happening, just as it happens to the protagonists. Hylics. Hylics is a JRPG that invites us to enter a surreal world, only suitable for the most imaginative players. Its particular visual section, abstract by all means, serves as a backdrop for an open-world adventure in which the user can explore cities and dungeons of all kinds, and with a visual construction that makes an impact by developing the claymation technique so masterfully. The premise of Hylics is simple. The protagonist, Wayne, embarks on a journey to find and defeat the Moon King, Gibby. Along the way, he forms a group of adventurers consisting of the knight Pangorma, the archaeologist Dedismon, and the insect-obsessed Samsnosa, exploring a world that works from a very specific logic. The rest of the plot is irrelevant. As an alternate interpretation of traditional role-playing video games, the narration and character dialogue are randomly generated by a text program, creating unconnected, context-free conversations that underscore the absurd reality of Hylics' world. This is reflected in every element that makes up the game system. Instead of the traditional stats that govern a role-playing game, i.e. the numbers that symbolize the player's strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, Hylics' characters make use of their power, texture, joy, cuisine, guts, and philology, and it is up to the player to decipher what each one refers to. Moreover, instead of the usual life and magic points, the game offers flesh and will as a representation of the group's abilities. Thus, we get a game that revolves around the tangibility of what surrounds us. Everything in Hylics is about the malleable, about bodies. When Wayne and company lose a battle, we can see an animation of the protagonist's skin melting off his bones, that is, literally losing all his flesh. Nothing happens. The afterlife has a system of portals that allow you to come back without any penalty. In contrast, fallen enemies with names like Cone Cultists or Sinister Holograms sometimes leave meat behind, which you can use to make your band of adventurers stronger. This whole adventure, according to its author, is an exercise to recover the tangible and the real, even if only in the digital medium that borders on the philosophical during each combat sequence, evoking complex emotions through the flesh of all the characters, making the sum of it all so strange that it is hard to describe. Don't Escape Trilogy. Developed by Scriptwelder and published by Armor Games Studios, this saga follows a clear line in which the player will have to navigate between different shelters to protect himself and others. In the first Don't Escape, players find themselves in a remote cabin overlooking a small town. Before night falls, you'll have to find a way to effectively secure yourself inside the cabin, using everything at your disposal to protect the villagers from yourself. Because when the full moon rises, you become a werewolf. And if you fail in your mission, you will condemn an entire village to a slow and painful death from which they will not be able to escape. In Don't Escape 2, you and your friend have barely survived the undead ravaging your village, and you must find a way to fortify the place where you have taken refuge before night falls. The only problem is that time is against you as you scour the surrounding areas for supplies, and your friend doesn't look too good. In Don't Escape 3, you wake up aboard a silent spaceship that hides a frightening discovery. Without your memories, you must find your way back home as you unravel the mystery of what happened to you and the crew. But are you really alone as you think? Endoparasitic. This title, developed by Deep Root Interactive, starts from a simple premise. We are a body with missing legs and a missing arm, and we have been infected with a deadly parasite. Under these conditions, we will have to survive through the corridors of a scientific base in a meteorite. In this dark and terrifying scenario, the player is immersed in a world ravaged by an endoparasitic threat. The main objective is to evade and neutralize the parasites that have taken over the bodies of the inhabitants. The player assumes the role of a scientist of the facility who was ambushed by the parasites at the beginning of the outbreak, which, after being released, tore off his limbs and left him to die. However, against all odds, he would manage to survive and heal his wounds. Now, he has to survive by crawling with only one arm through the destroyed and dark facilities that have become the lair of an infinity of monsters that seem to have come out of hell itself. The scientist acquires the will to desperately try to free humanity from this terrible plague. To do so, he must explore different scenarios in search of clues, resources, and tools that will allow him to confront the parasites and free the possessed victims. Kindergarten Killer. This is a shooting gallery in which you control a dissatisfied janitor, which, fed up with the complaints of the direct school, takes out a shotgun to kill him. For some reason, this unleashes the murderous fury of the students who will take their own gun to try to kill you, so the player will have to navigate through the school corridors, killing these preschoolers to escape. It's those kinds of titles that try to generate controversy by exploiting a sensitive topic. But in this case, beyond the morbid idea on which it is based on, there is not much to rescue. Although it seems to have had enough repercussion to scandalize certain people, since the NRA tried to remove it from various internet pages 10 years after its release in 2002. It is currently considered partially lost media, since there are shortened versions of it on the internet, as well as some emulations that have allowed players to record evidence of its existence. Calm Time. Calm Time is a short indie horror game created by Goose Entertainment and released on November 20th, 2013. In this narrative, you are a person who lives in a small house in the countryside, far away from civilization. There, silence and quietness are the norm, and only the wind and the birds break that silence from time to time. Still, things can get lonely often, so you have invited some people to the house for a party, and everything seems to be going pretty well. That is, until the situation goes wrong and they would be trapped with a murderer and without any help. The game at that time would give the player control of the murderer with a single mission: to kill everyone in the house, both the women and men, while they try to futilely defend themselves without exceptions, including the children. Lost in Vivo. This is a first-person perspective. Just like traditional survival horror games, ammunition for guns are limited, and the progression through levels is based on exploration and puzzle solving. This is one of those titles that emanate all the aura of classic horror from the PlayStation 2 era, but with a modern facelift, while at the same time exploiting one of the world's most common fears, claustrophobia, driving you through sewers infested with multiple aberrations in order to rescue your dog who got trapped after a powerful storm. Therefore, you will have to explore dark tunnels, solve puzzles, and fight against strange creatures until you reach your lost dog. Along the way, you will meet other people that are also stricken by an abnormal or psychological fear. You may be able to help them just as you may be able to free yourself, but just as likely, they or you may be beyond any help. The already arduous journey soon becomes a spiraling nightmare in which the protagonist must fight for their life against warped otherworldly horrors. Among the most remarkable things is its similarity to Silent Hill, but not only in the design of the monsters, which are extremely grotesque as they are a metaphor for the psyche of the protagonist, but also manages to generate an atmosphere so powerful and vivid that it keeps the senses extremely tense. Fran Bow. Everything is fine. I feel like I'm in heaven. Those are the words with which Fran Bow opens, one of the most distressing and disturbing video games I've ever played. This title was the first work of the Swedish studio Kill Monday Games and was released exclusively for PC in 2015. It tells us the story of a 10-year-old girl named Fran Bow, who was committed to a psychiatric hospital after the brutal murder of her parents in 1944. The player takes the place of Fran, who is curious, intelligent, and sweet, but above all, naive. When the game starts, our goal is to escape the hospital and find Mr. Midnight, Fran's beloved cat, who is also her only friend in the world. This is obviously a narrative-heavy game, and the progression goes hand in hand with the unfolding of Fran's story, in an adventure that becomes increasingly twisted and extravagant. Fran is caught between two worlds as she suffers from severe hallucinations that transform her perception of reality with grotesque murder scenes full of blood, corpses, and monsters. Fran's hallucinations can be activated by the medicine she is given in the hospital, which she carries with her throughout the game. From this detail derives the incredible duality of the whole adventure, where on the one hand we have a world of children's fairy tales, and on the other, a nightmare out of a gore movie. In this game, we need to take the pills to move strategically between the two realities, which will allow us to find exits and objects necessary for progression, as well as giving us a glimpse into Fran's psyche. In a way, it is kind of like a visual psychoanalysis that materializes the feelings of the protagonist in an adventure that displays high violence. Violence that is both implicit and explicit. Discover My Body. This is a free simulation game that will take you to the future in a dystopian society. The year is 2040, and there is an eccentric trend going on in this futuristic society called flowering. It is a medical procedure in which doctors infect humans with lab-synthesized fungus of great psychic power to merge with their shared collective consciousness. As a medical student, your job is to apply this fungus to a new host, one of the fungus researchers. He's excited about it, which is a bit unsettling, as the experiment is highly intrusive. The rest of the game will have you scan the host's body by moving a small robot-like scanner around the larger black window on the screen. There are 3 layers you have to scan: topical, skeletal, and nervous. You will have to find a hotspot, and the patient will explain what is happening to him. The patient may start screaming, but don't worry, it's all part of the process. The presentation, the scratchy and confusing sound effects, and the disturbing images of a distorted body all add up to give players of this game an unnerving experience. Add to this the disinterested tone of the patient as he nonchalantly narrates the gruesome process, and it makes it even creepier. Grotto. Grotto is a very peculiar title. In it, we get into the skin of a fortune teller who is able to read the stars, talk to the dead, and interpret the will of destiny by playing a kind of banjo. All of these mystical abilities will help us give advice to neighbors of a nearby tribe that will approach our cave in search of help. Our decisions may have more or less an impact on the lives of this society, depending not only on which constellation we use to answer their questions, but also on how these people understand these answers. Grotto knows how to play very well with this theme, and from it, touches on many others that shape the story of the game. Loss, power, community, love, all written with exquisite taste, although with a perhaps too direct rhythm that could use some moments of active ellipsis. Sometimes we feel that we are all the time making relevant decisions for the future of the village, and our role in the tribe is becoming more and more established as its regent. Even though our advice may have unpredictable impact in some cases, with fatal consequences for your companions or for the whole village in case you cannot anticipate the dangers coming from the outside. Fragile. Fragile is a game set in the Ulaanbaatar district of Mongolia. The story tells how a little 10-year-old girl is kidnapped one day after school and tries to escape from a clandestine human trafficking organization. Locked in an unknown location, the little girl seeks to escape through dark passages. She must avoid security guards, guard dogs, and other types of enemies. The game uses the child's point of view of the protagonist to make us see how little by little elements of her reality become distorted. These visual metaphors are accompanied by some effects that contribute to create the notion of the irreparable damage that this experience is having on the brave protagonist. Primarily a 2D adventure, Fragile uses a hand-drawn aesthetic that balances the macabre with the childlike perspective of its protagonist. Overall, it evokes the big-headed child in a scary world vibe of video games like Limbo or the Little Nightmares series. This extends to the gameplay, which mixes up the environmental puzzle solving and chase sequences from these games with findable text documents and a few mini-games. It is not a fairy tale, but a human horror story that delves into the truth about child abduction in the corners of Mongolia. There will be mutilations, deformations, creatures, and children's screams in a way so crude and unpleasant that you will never wish to see anything like it in real life. Necronomicon PC98. Necronomicon is a Japanese horror adventure game released for the NEC PC9801, or simply the PC98. And this PC was a series of Japanese 16-bit and 32-bit microcomputers manufactured by NEC between 1982 and 2000. It dominated the Japanese personal computer market due to its proprietary architecture, which included advanced graphics and sound systems that outperformed IBM-compatible PCs. These features made the PC98 a popular choice for both business and video game development in Japan. Set in the fictional world of author H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, Necronomicon is set in the Lovecraft's fictional city Arkham, somewhere in New England. It is said that a terrible ritual has taken place there, involving a woman giving birth to a demonic child. A journalist named Jonathan heads to Arkham to find out more about the dreadful rumors and to explore the ruins of an ancient monastery. In the town, Jonathan meets other characters with their own agendas. Terrifying nightmares, like visions from the past, haunt him. The story is quite dense like any Lovecraftian book and maintains a high level of gore and eroticism, and is told through a hand-drawn illustration in manga style. So many of the scenes are quite well detailed, which create this hollow atmosphere where you can feel there is something missing as you explore the cult of a pagan god of the region that seems to be worshipped by a cult which has kept the town in a constant cycle of tragedy to hide its heinous acts involving the sacrifice of multiple victims over the years, and the attempt to create a new world of the dead. Jonathan discovers all these secrets, and while he manages to get into the cult of Cthulhu, he confronts the leaders of the organization, ending his quest with the destruction of Arkham City and escaping to return to London, to try to tell somebody this story that no one else will ever believe. The Void. The Void is a horror video game belonging to the adventure genre, developed in 2008 by the Russian studio Icepick Lodge. It was published in Russia, other CIS countries, and Poland by ND Games on April 17, 2008. The game is about a soul accidentally trapped in the void, before absolute death. The void is like a place in purgatory, where the most valuable thing is color, a liquid that represents the life force. Color is scarce and hunger is a common thing for its inhabitants. There is a remote chance to survive in the void and even to return from it. This chance is the color, the only food a wandering soul can use in the dreary realms of the void, ruled by monstrous brothers and malicious sisters who fight desperately for the last drops of it. The color inside the hearts also acts as the hero's health and character stats. There are 7 colors at the player's disposal, which are silver, gold, violet, blue, crimson, amber, and emerald, each with their own characteristics that can affect the void and how we fight in it to survive and consume even more color. Finally, if we are persistent enough to collect enough color, the protagonist will be able to regain his soul and return to the mortal world. Cosmology of Kyoto. Cosmology of Kyoto is a video game developed by SoftEdge in 1993, arriving in the West a year later. The game takes players to the ancient city of Kyoto during the Heian period in Japan, focusing on the exploration of the city and its surroundings. Being developed for educational purposes, it seeks to offer an experience rich in culture, mythology, and superstitions of the time. The player assumes the role of a recently deceased soul who finds himself in the spirit realm and must seek answers about his death and its purpose. As they progress through the game, players are confronted with riddles, mythical creatures, and challenges from beyond, while exploring the many historical sites of Kyoto in the year 794 AD, when the emperor decides to change the capital of the country, establishing it now in Kyoto. A forced change due to the intense struggles between the great Japanese powers, which often left victims in their wake, and with it many spirits more angry than disorderly. And to defend themselves from such spiritual forces, they elaborate a complete mystical fortress with Buddhist, Taoist, and other Chinese influences, which in this period of history were on the rise. Many of the characters in the game are based on real-life characters from the city, and their appearances in the game are often loosely based on the tales from the Konjaku Monogatari-shu. The game deals with religion and philosophy, particularly Buddhist philosophy, as well as myth and legend. Konjaku Monogatari-shu, also known as the Konjaku Monogatari, is a Japanese collection of over 1,000 tales written during the late Heian period. The game is controlled by clicking hotspots and text options when appropriate. The user also types in sentences upon occasion. The game opens with options for character creation, and it is important to remember the name you give your character because it doubles as the password when you restore a saved game. You are then able to choose what your avatar will look like, but don't be too picky. You will die sooner or later and be reincarnated as a completely different person, complete with an entirely new look. One of the most brilliant elements in the game is its handling of character death. As the game begins, the player character is born and must take the clothes off a nearby corpse. The game does not have a clear goal, but is instead non-linear and emphasizes open exploration, giving the player the freedom to explore Kyoto with many pathways, buildings, situations, stories, and secrets to discover throughout the city, including both realistic and supernatural elements. The progress through the city affects a journey through history, with a street map and online guide provided to ancient and modern Kyoto at various points through the game. When you die, and you most assuredly will, you experience one of a variety of hells described in Buddhism. In these hells, your character is tortured in a wide variety of gruesome ways. You are then reincarnated either as another human or as something else. At one point, you witness a dog eating the entrails of a corpse before being devoured itself by a larger dog. You might very well find yourself reincarnated as that doomed dog, and then the cycle repeats itself. Cosmology of Kyoto attempts to be many things: a game, an educational tool, and a work of art. Unbelievably, it manages to be all of these things and more. Nightmare Creatures. This time-forgotten experience is a diamond in the rough that was probably part of the inspiration for titles like Bloodborne or Soul Reaver. The story is set in 1834, as London falls to a strange virus which is half science and half arcane magic in nature. It mutates its inhabitants into terrifying creatures. The creator is Adam Crowley, a bicentennial alchemist who wishes to free humans from mortality and take control of the world with his new race of men. The plague will serve as an army against the scholar Ignatius Blackwood and the explorer Nadia Francescus, who will try to stop his plans at the risk of losing their lives. We will assume control of either Ignatius or Nadia, our mission being to find Crowley's hideout to finish him off. This will be the first decision we make in the game and the most important, because it determines to some extent the difficulty of the game. Choosing Ignatius, we opt for attacks based on short and forceful blows, and in the role of Nadia, we have other combinations of more extensive and complicated attacks. With our combat skills as our only protection, we will go through 16 narrow areas of London trying to survive Crowley's terrifying monsters. Unfortunately, it won't be enough to attack a couple of them and run. From our landing in Chelsea, the initial neighborhood, we will deal with an adrenaline bar that will be decreasing if we don't hit every living creature that crosses our path. Regarding the story, this meter implies that neither Ignatius nor Nadia are immune to the virus released by Crowley. Therefore, if the meter is empty, we will have a huge problem. Apart from common enemies, we will have to deal with 4 bosses and 2 area sub-bosses: a sewer snake, giant spiders, the snowman, giant gargoyles, Jose Manuel, and of course, Adam Crowley. With its gothic and desolate setting coupled with truly unpleasant designs, even though it's PlayStation 1 graphics, it manages to be convincing enough to generate an atmosphere that evokes terror and the urge to kill everything that stands in front of you in order to survive. The 11th Hour. The 11th Hour is a horror video game presented as an interactive graphic adventure, developed by Trilobite and published by Virgin Interactive in 1995 for Windows and Mac OS. The story takes place in the year 1995 with our protagonist Carl Denning, an investigative reporter for the television series Case Unsolved. His producer and lover, Robin Morales, has mysteriously disappeared while investigating a series of gruesome murders and disappearances in the small, quiet town of Harley-on-the-Hudson. The only clue is a laptop computer called a gamebook, which was given to him by strangers postmarked Harley, New York. The 11th Hour uses logical puzzles to advance the plot, but with an added element into the gameplay. First, you get a riddle by Stauff in the gamebook, referring to any object in the mansion. Then you have to find and interact with said object to solve the riddle. But every time you enter a new room, you can't interact with any object whatsoever until you solve the puzzle located in said room to unlock the objects and the rest of the room. There are also a lot of red herring objects you can interact with, and every time you solve a riddle, you're awarded a short cutscene, usually depicting Robin's investigation before her disappearance. Later in the game, it also shows Carl's adventure in the mansion. The game's story is divided into acts, represented by each passing hour, in which at the end of each act, a longer cutscene plays, including the smaller cutscenes you've collected so far, advancing the story along. Personal Nightmare. Personal Nightmare is a horror adventure game developed and published by HorrorSoft for the Amiga, Atari ST, and the MS-DOS in 1989. On this occasion, we received a letter from our father, a pastor in a small village. The strangeness of the letter makes us visit the place, but once there, we will find no trace of our father, and we will see that the locals behave in a hostile and strange way. As we begin our investigation, we will discover that evil forces have taken over the place, and we will have to see how to resolve this situation. The game makes us use a combination of text-based commands, clickable verbal commands, and clickable objects to progress. A compass indicates which directions the player can travel. Much of the game's movement and actions are real-time based, so there is a day and night cycle. The player's inventory can be viewed in the respective menu, and there are many encounters that can kill the player, ideally at nighttime, unless the player performs a proper action to avoid them. Newer versions of the game omitted the encounters where the players get garroted. The player loses the game if 4 days pass and all the required possessed citizens have not been killed and the devil has not been repelled. Biofreaks. Biofreaks is a 3D fighting game set in the not-too-distant future in the United States. 50 states were divided into private territories after the techno-industrial civil wars. Technology and bioengineering accelerated at an incredible pace and forced an industrial competition of corporate espionage. The government tried to maintain control of the country by a single thread, but the effect of the white-collar wars of giant corporations sent the economy into a tailspin. Neo-America emerges as a result of the government's bankruptcy and the takeover of technology companies. To maintain order, the Secret Games Commission, or the SGC, is formed to organize tournaments that decide which organization can control all of Neo-America, leading to the creation of biological, flying robotic-enhanced armored killing synthoids, or biofreaks, that serve as champions for each participating organization. Each character has a unique set of moves and combos that the player can perform to defeat opponents. In addition, the game features a damage system that directly affects the character's moves. In some cases, we will be able to dismember our opponents throughout the fight to make it go in our favor, among other options such as using the environment to hurt opponents, shooting from the weapons built into each character for ranged attacks, or using an energy shield to protect against damage for a few brief moments before then counterattacking. This adds a level of strategy and realism to the game, as well as a touch of violence and gore. Galerians. As a game in the survival horror genre, this game shares numerous parallels with Resident Evil, along with other titles that have attempted to replicate the successful formula of the renowned zombie franchise. When the game starts, we go into a hospital where a young man is undergoing tests, and Ryan, the main character, hears a voice of a girl in his mind. Ryan needs to understand his circumstances and the source of the voice before making his escape. He then realizes he possesses psychic powers, allowing him to utilize abilities and substances obtained through experiments to move forward. However, the overuse of these powers will have repercussions on Ryan, because by using these powers too much, he will enter a phase of great tension, so he will have no control over the use of his abilities in such a way that he will cause the death of his enemies in the most graphic and violent way possible. He will make their heads explode, and he will not only do it on an enemy, but also on all those who are in the psychic zone. But it is also dangerous for himself, as our protagonist's health bar will be affected, as he will not be able to use other abilities, and he will become slower while in this phase. And that is why it is very important to find medication that will help Ryan get out of this phase of tension and uncontrol. This adventure ends with Ryan becoming the most powerful telepath in the world, with the ability to save or condemn the world. Forbidden Sirens. Siren, also known as Forbidden Siren in Europe and Australia, is a survival horror video game developed by Sony Computer Entertainment for PlayStation 2 in 2003. The game details the story of several characters trapped in an old Japanese village over the course of 3 days. It takes place in a remote rural mountain village in Japan called Hanada, which is characterized as very traditional and particularly xenophobic. The story of the game is that the inhabitants of the village are submerged in the surrounding red waters, abducted by the mermaid, resurfacing as shibitos, or undead. But there is a group of 10 survivors to this call, which will be trapped in Hanada for 3 days with these beings, which will live in different nightmares at different times and places. All the characters share a common ability, the Sight Jack, where they will be able to see with the eyes of others to survive the tragedy. The point of the story focuses on the efforts of Hisako Yao, leader of a strange local religion, who wants to resurrect or awaken an extraterrestrial being known as Datachi through an occult ceremony. While Datachi is indisputably alien, the methods of his resurrection and the effects of his presence remain supernatural. The mermaid is Datachi's call, summoning the residents of Hanada to immerse themselves in the red water, which, again, infinitely surrounds the mountains. With this, he creates an army of minions called Shibito, which in translation literally means corpse person. The Shibitos then begin building a nest to receive Datachi's physical form once he has been summoned, and in the process, eliminating and turning any remaining humans in Hanada. Unlike other horror games, Siren's gameplay is against direct encounters with enemies, in this case the Shibitos in each level. The player can walk silently, avoid using flashlights, and even crouch to avoid detection. Some missions involve the use of objects and the environment to displace the Shibitos from their usual positions, and the player can also shout at any time to draw the attention of the nearest Shibitos. Depending on the level, the player can start with some weapon, obtain it in the course of the level, or simply neither of the above. Weapons can be objects to hit, like rods, hammers, or wrenches, or firearms, such as revolvers and rifles. Shibitos can be defeated in combat, but cannot be eliminated, and will rise again after a short period, briefly remaining in an alert state. Similarly, if the player is wounded, he will eventually recover. Strawberry Cubes. Strawberry Cubes is a platformer that encourages unorthodox exploration. The first step should be to visit the .txt file that comes with the game, which explains some basic controls. There is no tutorial, no title screen, and no options menu. Strawberry Cubes is an unorthodox platformer in which the player navigates a surrealistic maze. The game lacks a conventional control scheme, and players are encouraged to try pressing other keys on the keyboard, which have effects that include warping the player across the screen or to hidden rooms, or changing the visual presentation of the game. Navigation is assisted by collecting and planting seeds, which sprout and allow the player to climb vertically. Without a user interface, the player is required to use context clues from the simulated glitches and bugs in the game to progress. There is no end to the game, and it is left to the player to explore the spaces in the game to uncover its features. There are hidden features and secrets in the game that refer to the overarching intent of the creator, including hidden messages and images in the game and its files. The rooms in Strawberry Cubes follow a logic that is not always what we expect, because it's not always the same. Here before there was a door, and now there's a bell. Here before there was a creeper, and now there are stairs. But then there will be a pile of skulls, and then there will be a random sprite. Little by little, if we pay attention, we do find objectives. The things that happen in Strawberry Cubes don't just happen, but the buttons to press to make them happen are not always clear. Germs. Developed and distributed by KAJ in 1999 exclusively for Japan, Germs Nerawareta Machi is an open-world first-person adventure game with horror and science fiction elements. Similarly to Mizurna Falls and LSD, both of which made in 1998, Germs was once an innovative and experimental game that was not released in the West, and it possessed no translation patch into other languages, only being playable in Japanese. Until now. You play as a newspaper reporter who has returned to his hometown in order to investigate mysterious occurrences regarding strange mutated creatures appearing in the region. But the real draw about the game is how absolutely strange and surreal it is. For starters, the packaging. It's an image of distorted naked human bodies without even a logo or a title. The name is only listed on the side of the spine card. All of the exterior areas are displayed almost entirely in black and white, similar to an old sci-fi movie, except for the gigantic red arrows floating in the sky that indicate which of the few buildings you can actually enter. There are no other cars or people on the road either, giving the city an extremely eerie atmosphere. At one point, you're joined by an NPC, but there's no pathfinding AI, so he just wraps around to wherever he needs to be. There is a movie showing an alien spacecraft flying through another planet found on the game CD, but no apparent way to view it in the game, nor any clue what it actually means. And then there's the designs of the aliens themselves, which are bizarre in and of themselves. Some NPCs have textured photographs on their faces, which is disturbing. Others have no faces at all, which is also creepy in an entirely different way. The player can navigate the open world by walking, driving a car, or taking public transport. The gameplay consists of exploring, gathering information, and engaging in combat. If the player loses to a mutant, they don't die, but rather end up infected. The player can cure their infection by going to the hospital. Information can be gained from reading emails on the office computer, talking with people in the city, and reading the text you see upon defeating enemies. Progression occurs when defeating the mutants in an invaded building. As time goes on, more areas become affected. The game ends when stopping the mutants at their source in the abandoned coal mine. However, the player can still explore the world after the ending scene. I'm Null. I'm Null is a 2014 video game by Austin-based independent developer Zach Isles. Described as a virtual horror art gallery, I'm Null is an experimental multiplayer game in which players explore wireframe environments. Although it is a multiplayer, the involvement of other players is passive, represented by vertical lines, and there is no direct form of interaction or communication between players. Players input a string of numbers at the start of the game, which is the only way they are identifiable to other players. The game is open-ended, without any goals or direction, and consists of exploration through the stark environments in the game. The game also features Null, as the title suggests, which is a wireframe head described as a ghost in the machine that occasionally appears in the game and seems to move autonomously, such as mimicking the player's movement and chasing them, and has the capacity to ban players from the game if caught by removing them instantly. Who is Lila? In Who is Lila, we wake up again and again in our living room. Standing in the middle of the stage, the protagonist always recites the same soliloquy. I am unable to express emotions naturally. That's why, every morning, I stand in front of the mirror and practice the gestures I will have to perform during the day. There is something sad about Will, but also something terrifying. Here, we are not dealing with a person who has difficulty socializing, but with what looks like an empty shell. A young man incapable of feeling and acting like a human being, who needs to consciously think about the movement of every muscle in his face before he can return a simple smile. And if Will smiles, it's because he wants something. Most of the time, it's not anything good. In Garage Heathen's game, we don't have to choose what Will says, but we do properly accompany his words so that the rest of the characters act as he wants them to. Because while we only want to solve a mystery, the one about the disappearance of Tanya Kennedy, Will has other goals in mind: to lie, manipulate, and threaten to prevent suspicions from falling, rightly so, on his person. In Who's Lila, we have a split screen that's on the left side, allowing us to explore scenarios, and on the right side to control Will's face. And the facial expressions are not just an eye-catching gimmick or cute curiosity, but something that profoundly affects the story and the way we experience it. An early example of this can be found in one of the branches that leads us to the block of apartments where a female companion lives. Although we have in our possession the key to her apartment, we don't know the code to the portal, so we'll have to wait for a neighbor to open the door before we can sneak inside. But nothing is as easy as it seems. On the landing, suspicious of our presence, the neighbor is waiting for us and asks us if we live there. And of course, Will lies. We can accompany his lie with a confident smile, but this does nothing but set off his alarms. If we repeat this fragment enough times, we will understand that there are only two possible responses. Either we show ourselves surprised and vulnerable, docile and attentive to his words, or we rely on anger to make him the intimidated one. Both solutions allow us to reach Martha's apartment, but only one of them will be favorable for the future, because our expressions have consequences. Of all the elements that make up Who's Lila, and among which the visual section stands out from the start, the ones that end up definitely raising the quality of the game are the structure, the expressiveness of the gameplay, and the narrative ambiguity. At the beginning, one of the most intelligent cards used by Who's Lila is to make it so that, despite Will being our avatar in the game, he has a totally different objective than ours that, at times, hinders us. Moving Will's face is difficult. It's heavy. We're never going to nail a gesture, let alone against the clock, when his muscles contract sinisterly without us being able to help it. The gestures we deliver to our interlocutors are always odd, and sometimes they themselves are the ones who comment on it. And this is where we perceive more clearly the expressiveness of the gameplay. Creating good expressions is difficult from a ludic point of view, so it makes the game more fun. But this difficulty has an impact on the narrative because mimicking feelings is something totally alien to Will that it forces him to hyper-concentrate. Our grimaces look strange because in the end, what we deliver is nothing more than a crude imitation whose only goal is to make others think that there is nothing strange about us. The story, characterization, and gameplay come together here in a window in which we move lips, eyebrows, and chins to turn facial movements into a puzzle, a difficult puzzle, because deep down, we are not entirely human. Keep Her Awake. Keep Her Awake was an online game that was made to coincide with the release of the 2010 remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street. The game had the player attempt to keep a girl safe from Freddy by preventing her from falling asleep, with methods ranging from coffee, cold showers, and even self-mutilation. The game used to be hosted on KeepHerAwake.com, but nowadays the URL directs you to the official Warner Brothers page for the original 1984 film, The Static Speaks My Name. The Static Speaks My Name is a short but intense exploration game that takes you through the last moments of a man's life. Developed by The Whale Husband, this game is a unique mix of dark, sad, strange, and fun elements that make it a unique experience. The game is more of a story than a game and emphasizes mood and character over gameplay, making it an emotional and immersive experience. The game is only 10 minutes to play. However, please note that the game contains explicit suicide handling, which may be disturbing for some players. Our first contact in this world is the sound of an alarm clock that reads 3:22 in the morning, followed by the vision of a drawing hanging from the ceiling that says, "Today will be a better day." After that, we get out of bed, already in the skin of Jacob, and a series of objectives are responsible for making us tour the house and knowing in the process what the character's situation is. The first of these objectives is as simple as using the room's sink. That is to say, just take a few steps, open the door, go to the toilet, but curiosity will be in charge of slowing our progress and making us seek, before arriving at the service, a minimum of inquiry. Jacob does not act according to the rules that we have all internalized. Thus, we will find the painting of a small island with 2 palm trees, the image of a fish tank full of shrimp, a shelf full of books, and a couple of meters away, the same fish tank we had seen in the photograph. This is the state of things in which Jacob lives: isolation, loneliness, denial. And the static that speaks my name is able to make us understand it with some indications and a minimal interaction, summarized in moving around inside the house and executing certain actions. This tells us how miserable and reduced is the existence of this man, separated from a world that is alien to him and secluded by his own decision in a tiny space in which to exist, with nothing to do but to walk from one corner to another, read a book, use the toilet, raise shrimp, and then eat them if necessary. We are talking about a reduction to the absurdity of existence. Anatomy. Anatomy is a psychological horror game created by Kitty Horror Show. The game starts with the player inside of an empty and abandoned home, with the only company being a cassette tape with recordings from someone who had been in there prior, which the player finds throughout the house. The person on the tapes describes a house as being very resemblant to the human mind and body and goes into detail about why it therefore can't be trusted. In the psychology of the modern civilized human being, it is difficult to overstate the significance of the house. Since as early as the Neolithic era, humankind has defined itself by its buildings. Buildings for washing, buildings for socializing, buildings for protection, even buildings for the commemoration of the dead. But of all the structures mankind has invented for itself, there is little doubt that the house is that which it relies upon most completely for its continued survival. This is how the game begins, with a warning of what a house can become, and with this you are tasked with finding all the videotapes to learn the origin of everything that happens during the game and why we are locked in a house that hates us. Graphically, the game is very basic, very dark, and deliberately flawed. The house definitely has a backrooms feel to it, in the sense that the layout of it makes less sense the longer you're in it. The images mysteriously change and you can never see more than a few feet in front of you. Each game only lasts about 5 minutes. The catch is that the game is supposed to be run multiple times, only to get progressively more screwed up each time you load it up. The game does a brilliant job of blurring the fourth wall, and, while thankfully free of jump scares, it still instills a sense of suffocating dread just through the atmosphere, that without needing to be explicit or too graphic, borders on body horror. Dark Cute. Dark Cute. This is a trilogy of games developed in Flash, in which we follow the story of 3 different doctors who are in the middle of a battlefield during a war between unknown countries, and throughout the 3 games you will try to save as many lives as possible to allow your people to return home. In the first game, we find ourselves in an era contemporary to the First World War, and we will be a Catholic missionary advancing between the trenches, with the twist that at the end of the game you will have to face a vampire, eliminating him before he can come back to life. This being the true mission of the protagonist. The second game presents a graphical improvement that evolves from the classic paint paintings of the time to use scanned and realistic images, using a higher level of blood and placing the player in much more extreme, unpleasant, and somewhat disconcerting situations, in which we will even have to amputate our own leg at a certain point to escape from the battlefield. The third installment improves on the previous 2 and is much heavier than her older sisters. In this case, the story takes a much more important role, because now we are in a futuristic war hired by a multinational to provide medical support to an unnamed army. For this mission, we will be assisted by an artificial intelligence, which will be giving you the indications on what to do. However, this assistance will gradually try to take over the player's body by disabling their pain receptors, leaving the fate of this character as something ambiguous. The Ex-Morty games are point-and-click horror adventure games, using a dark, gritty graphical style, relying heavily on edited photos turned into sprites, similar to the digitized graphical style of the original Mortal Kombat games. Each game becomes increasingly story-driven as you follow along, as 2 separate characters experience the awakening of Ex-Morty, the takeover of the world by them, and their eventual defeat. In this game, created by Ben Leffler, you wake up without memory in the middle of a forest at night. You don't know where to go, and by inertia, you keep walking along the road until you find an abandoned house in which you enter in the hope of finding help. Thus begins Exmorty, changing your goal to discover the mysteries hidden in this peculiar house. As the man explores the house and its past, he finds several mutilated bodies. He slowly pieces together the puzzle of the house, realizing that the house is infested with demonic entities and other mysteries. The opening to Exmorty is probably one of the simplest yet most effective ways one of these games can open. At first glance, the jump scares at the beginning of the game might come off as cheap, but I would argue they are actually quite appropriate from a narrative point of view. The opening text states that you wake up in the middle of the woods with no recollection of how you got there other than the visions of nightmares that haunt you. With the opening being the sound of a heartbeat, the faces and screams of people, and the sound of howling wind, I think this effectively draws the player into the situation of the character in the game. Exmorty is a game that encourages the player heavily to learn about what is going on through the use of flavor text and items scattered around the abandoned house you explore. There is a lot of reading involved for this game, and it might be a turnoff for someone who just wants to get to the end of the game. But if you take your time and immerse yourself in the lore through these interesting texts, it makes the game feel far more enjoyable and fleshes out the world considerably. The dark and gritty graphics, while aged, still convey a strong sense of horror, and the use of audio to even further immerse the player into this world is incredibly effective. Be it the sparing use of ghostly voices, the dull roar of the wind outside, the subtle hits of percussion when you find a disturbing scene, or the terrifying sound the Exmorty makes should you choose the alternate ending as they chase you through the underground tunnels below the house. Necrosaria. Disgust and uneasiness as a virtue of the sinister, Necrosaria is, above all, a visceral experience of contemporary unease. For this adventure, you will enter an extremely apathetic world until by accident you reach the world of Necrosaria, a land full of zombies, mutants, and freaks who are willing to eat us alive in order to feel human once again. Escaping this strange and dark world will depend on solving a multitude of puzzles, as well as collecting objects that you will have to use to complete your mission. Getting out of this spooky place will depend on how skillful you are at solving these puzzles. But be careful, because these strange puzzles might drive you crazy. From escaping a subway cell to an attempted lobotomy, you'll advance through the land only to find yourself in a creepy forest that just keeps getting weirder and weirder. All of this spiced with a one-of-a-kind art style that creates a genuinely creepy atmosphere. Covetous. In each level, you play as a tiny cell, eating the other cells so that you can grow and escape your brother's body to be a real person, while unsettling music plays in the background. The screen shows a picture of a black figure, and you can see through him. It shows his brain and his heart. It also shows all the cells in his body and the cell that you play as. As the level progresses, your twin brother's health will decrease while the player becomes stronger and stronger, repeating his objective. I was the forgotten cell, left to die in the flesh of my brother. I felt myself become thick and lumpy, growing into the form that was robbed from me. I never desired wealth or status, just existence. When enough cells are finally gathered to grow, the embryo will launch its attack, and you will fight to emerge from the host's body, both of you fighting for its survival, until the parasite finally cuts its opponent in half and is finally able to breathe, with a chance to live. Saya no Uta Agnosia. This game narrates a true descent into madness from the eyes of its protagonist. In this visual novel, we step into the shoes of Fuminori Sakisaka, an attractive medical student with a bright future ahead of him, except that his past has robbed him of any chance of having a presence. Having been involved in a car accident that killed his entire family, he has since suffered a severe neurological injury, an extreme version of agnosia, a disorder that affects the ability to identify the stimuli we perceive through the senses, which makes him perceive everything around him as a monstrous gore nightmare. For him, the world is defined by walls and sheets made of viscera, fountains spurting blood, people who seem to be turned inside out and speak only in unpleasant, almost unintelligible squeaks, a constant smell of rottenness, and an unbearable noise that hardly lets him think. In other words, for Sakisaka, every day of his life is a walk through the very definition of hell, where he can only navigate with the vague hope, which grows distant more and more every day, of finding a cure for his condition. One night, he met someone he saw as a beautiful little girl. It was not only because of the phase he was in, where everything made him nauseous, but the young girl was the most beautiful and pure thing his eyes had ever beheld. It was Saya, who was even more surprised by the affable conversation that the prostrate young man was having with her. They hit it off quickly and made promises to each other. He invited her to live in his house, and she saw no reason to refuse, because every couple has a story about how they met and fell in love, and hers began that way. With that premise is how the first bars of Saya no Uta, or Saya's Song, begin, a game that has several routes and endings according to the decisions we make. In all of them, however, Fuminori's relationship with Saya is explored in depth, as well as how socialization is essential and how anyone, regardless of their species, can feel lonely and seek the company of others. Doorways, a horror video game released on September 20th, 2013, and produced and developed by an independent studio from Argentina called Cybot Studios, and distributed on the Steam platform. You play as Thomas Foster, a special agent who must track down 4 psychopaths. The creation of this Argentine team presents us with a first-person game, whose plot is based on the pursuit of a series of psychopaths in an unknown world, but strangely familiar to our protagonist. As we venture deep into the caverns, dark forests, and incredibly sinister houses with disturbing basements, a narrator with a Vincent Price-style voice will tell us our story, why we are chasing these deranged individuals, and how step by step we remember a little more, since at the beginning of the game we only know that our goal is to find the psychopaths, but we are not really clear about our life. Again, the feeling of loneliness is incredible during the game. As we go deeper into those dark forests with nothing but a torch in hand, we will feel more lost and more alone, although it is inevitable to feel that something is watching us and following us closely. And this is something very difficult to achieve in a game. Each scenario is one darker than another, and there is so much darkness on screen that the game forces us to play with the light off to see the stage well, something that surely was in the macabre minds of its developers, to play with us and scare us even more. My Eyes Deceive. My Eyes Deceive is a first-person psychological horror experience that makes players question their perception and consider whether they can blame themselves in retrospect. Set over the course of roughly a week, you play as a young girl who has been living in a shelter all her life. The outside world is infected with a deadly disease, plunging society into chaos. But fortunately, your papa is protecting you. The mechanics make us follow a daily routine that is repeated throughout a week in a repetitive and continuous manner, consisting of drinking water, bathing, eating, and taking 1 pill a day. These pills tend to distort reality so that whatever appears on the screen begins to look fuzzy and dreamlike as you can see things that were not there at first, unleashing a series of hallucinations that make the narrative even more confusing. At a certain point, the player can decide whether to administer the pills or not, which opens the possibility of exploring the environment, only to discover that the medicines are a sedative and that the supposed infection does not exist, which sows doubt in the girl. However, if she continues taking the pills, the visions will begin to become more aggressive until 147 days have passed in an ellipsis and the girl wakes up disconcerted, closing the game with a single question: why is my stomach so big and round? Kinder. Kinder is a Japanese indie video game developed by the Leiparun, Horafuku Yokuchao, with the RPG Maker engine. Its original version was lost with the obsolescence of its original operating system, but fortunately, the original game files were found, which allowed to create this remake that respects the original philosophy of the game, which finally allowed the translation of the title. Don't be fooled by the art of this one, as it tells a very original story with some pretty gory battles. This game mixes exploration and puzzle-solving mechanics, along with some turn-based RPG battles. The story is about a young boy named Shunsuke who goes on a trip to his grandparents' house. But when he returns home, he discovers that the whole city is in ruins and that his nanny and childhood friend have been transformed into a kind of zombie. He flees to his clubhouse to escape the creatures, where he meets other children who happen to be the only survivors of the city. They will soon discover that everything happens because of a child with strange powers, who challenges them to a game. Find and destroy 3 creatures known as princesses without dying along the way, and if they succeed, he will let them escape safe and sound. But any mistake will cost the life of one of the children. You will have to be careful and make sure they don't kill any of the children, which is a bit difficult. More so in the darkness, where anything can kill them, and depending on your choices and which people you save, you get one ending or another. Antumbra. Antumbra is a very odd game. It's creepy, scary, horrific, and incredibly hard. So hard that you can and should expect to die dozens of times. With this game being as difficult as it is, you'll be frustrated, but don't give up. You'll figure it out eventually. There is no context or story. You will only wake up in a dark and ochre-colored hallway surrounded by 1,000 monsters who are eager to consume our flesh. And there is no way to defend ourselves from everything on this plane, only our ability to get ahead of the dangers that surround us. Until we meet Jesus, which is the only glimpse of narrative in this nightmare, who will show us the way to atone for our sins and ascend to a higher form. Orange Roulette. This game is extremely short, less than 5 minutes, but manages to create a sense of discomfort by portraying an extremely graphic and violent event through a rather childish lens, and is inspired by a deer hunter, specifically the scene of Russian roulette, who understood their intentions. We are a Brazilian orange, which has been kidnapped by a group of gangsters who will force us to play Russian roulette against other captives until the armed forces manage to rescue us. However, when that happens, we will have seen death so close that we will never be the same again. Growing My Grandpa. Growing My Grandpa is, at its core, a virtual pet simulator, much like Tamagotchi, except players are hatching a horrifying monster. During the game, players are offered several interaction options. When speaking to it, Grandpa speaks of profound horrors, and when feeding, players can experiment in odd ways. By combining this dissonance with the creepy imagery of a creature pretending to be human, Growing My Grandpa creates a deep sense of unease and horror. And although Adrian, like the protagonist of most virtual pet simulators, is very fond of the grandpa she's raising, players are constantly fearing making wrong decisions that could result in putting themselves in danger. Growing My Grandpa also excels in being vague enough to constantly encourage the player to imagine the monster's doings in detail. Like many games horror fans never actually played, most of the game's content is displayed through text, be it the conversations, the description of what is taking place, or the files the player can encounter in the basement. Adrian's initial exploration of the basement, for example, uses several common horror tropes, such as the dangerous and dark basement and things hiding within the walls. But the description of what is found and the highly pixelated images lead to players imagining what Adrian finds and keeps them constantly looking out for something hiding within these images. This is a tactic used throughout the game, leading to an atmosphere so tense that any slight alteration in the environment can terrify and unsettle as a player's imagination works to understand what may have caused it. Baby Shaker. This was an app developed for the iOS system in 2009. Currently, the program has been banned from all digital stores and is considered lost media, and the only remaining proof of its existence are videos that slightly corroborate it. The application had the following description in the App Store. On a plane, on the bus, in a theater. Babies are everywhere you don't want them to be. They're always distracting you from preparing for that big presentation at work with their incessant crying. Before Baby Shaker, there was nothing you could do about it. As it was normal at the time, it was a very simple application that worked using the alarm systems of the cell phone. At the beginning of the application, several audios of crying babies were played, and to make it stop, we would have to shake the cell phone so that we would kill the infant, something that was represented by placing red X's in the eyes of children. The game generated a stir in the networks, so the App Store banned it and publicly pronounced itself with the following statement. This application was deeply offensive and should not have been approved for distribution on the App Store. When we learned of this mistake, the app was removed immediately. We sincerely apologize for this mistake and thank our customers for bringing this to our attention. A spokesperson on the controversy. Park Toucher Fantasy. This is another one of those strange Japanese fantasies. The story, as it could not be otherwise told, is an erotic game and is really an excuse for the deployment of explicit and sexual content. The plot begins with an unnamed boy, around 20, who feels lonely and lost without any meaning in life beyond walking in a park near his house. In one of these walks, he meets a little girl to whom he gives no importance to, until he sits next to her. They exchange glances momentarily, until the girl begins to pleasure herself in front of him. Bewildered by this, the boy does the same, and from there, the game tries to uselessly justify a romance between these two characters, making them always meet in the same park to be physically intimate every time they are given the opportunity. Without digging further into the subject, since I find it unpleasant, I can only say that this is nothing more than a visual novel without any appeal, nothing short of morbid, that unfortunately the Japanese legislation continues to allow in its distribution. Don't Chat with Strangers. Don't Chat with Strangers by Bartosz Bojarowski is a pixel art game that starts in the middle of the night. You receive a message from a mysterious girl online named Lucy. However, you realize that you're in grave danger. With our protagonist chatting through the computer with an unknown girl, and as the conversation progresses, strange things will happen in our room to which we can react or not, which will determine whether we stay alive or die in a rather painful way until we finally reveal the truth about Lucy, a ghost in pain who has come seeking revenge against her murderer. For this, the player will have to solve her riddles in order to find her body. Once we do this, we can give her a proper burial and allow her to rest in peace. Mamoru Takuma, Forever RPG. This game is based on the Ikeda School Massacre in Osaka Prefecture on the 8th of June in 2001. That day, Takuma went on a murderous rampage at Ikeda Elementary School. He began to attack students and teachers with a kitchen knife until he was wrestled down by staff. In the quick attack, Takuma killed 8 students, 7 8-year-olds and 1 7-year-old boy, and seriously wounded 13 other children and 2 teachers. On August 28, 2003, Takuma was found guilty of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to death. Takuma remained unrepentant, refusing to apologize to the families of the victims, and asked only for the sentence to be fulfilled as fast as possible. In court, he engaged in intentionally provocative behavior, including yawning, shaking his body, and staring at victims' family members. His statement was, "I should have used gasoline, so I could have killed more than I did." Takuma was executed at the Osaka Detention House only 1 year later, on the 14th of September in 2004, joining a long list of Japanese murderers and criminals who commit horrific acts for the sole purpose of receiving the death penalty, as many of these individuals deal with suicidal thoughts on a daily basis without the ability to carry them out. This event also accelerated the execution process in the country, and a school security reinforcement system was established. Returning to the game, which was developed in RPG Maker, it bears similarities to Super Columbine Massacre RPG, in which the player takes the role of the killer in a fairly faithful recreation of the events, beginning shortly before Takuma's psychotic break, briefly narrating the reasons for his depression and dealing with his death wish. However, being unable to end his own life, he would take a kitchen knife, traveling to the train station. His attention would be diverted when arriving at the Osaka school and seeing the half-open gate. He would then burst into the enclosure, attacking some of the children nearby. From there on, the player's mission will be to confront both the other children and the teachers, using the classic game engine system. For obvious reasons, the game has been banned on several platforms due to its graphic violence and the themes it touches. So its Japanese version, the original, has not received any translation and is currently extremely difficult to obtain, although perhaps that is the best thing, out of respect for the families of the victims. Messiah. Around the mid-2000s, after a tumultuous path, the developer Shiny Entertainment published this title with the pretension of making an experience that mixed cyberpunk with the religious. As science advanced, humans began to carry out dating experiments, defying the laws of creation. Their leader, called Father Prime, has come up with a most audacious plan: to contact Satan. His reasoning is that he who controls the devil will also know how to control God. When the earth is plunged into sin and corruption, God himself decides that the time has come to interfere. Since Bob is endowed with a human soul, he has free will and is capable of making decisions, even if it contradicts God's orders. With nothing but his frail angelic body, Bob descends into the sinful world. While in his cherub form, Bob is defenseless and can very easily be killed. However, he may possess any biological life form by jumping into their body. Once in control of a host, he can interact with the environment and NPCs by using switches or weapons and fighting in unarmed combat. The player, as Bob, is able to fly around at great heights, although his small wings can only carry him a limited distance from the ground, necessitating a combination of climbing and flying, and so the gameplay environment features a great deal of vertical movement and exploration. The game is divided into different scenarios. In the traditional style of the time, the objectives to fulfill in each of them are perfectly defined, but what is not so clear is how to solve them. Sometimes it's a puzzle. Each time you start a level, we have a contact with our boss, in which God informs us of our specific mission. Because of its theme, the game tends to touch sensitive fibers regarding the Christian religion, and because of its reactive character that frequently questions many of its aspects, several religious communities in different states, as it has happened before, express their dissatisfaction with the title, burying it before reaching a much wider audience. Besides the irreverence that it manages, the game ends up showing scenes on screen that are over the top, showcasing a constant carnage between human beings who seek to make a place in a decadent world. Undoubtedly an experience not for everyone. Trial of the Murder Dog. Trial of the Murder Dog is a 2011 video game by Irish independent developer Stephen Gilmurphy under the name The Catamites. The Murder Dog is on trial at The Hague for crimes against humanity. He stands charged with the killing of over 1,500 people in a brutal attack encompassing the use of toxic gas, a fire engine, and a blunt instrument. When these charges are put to the Murder Dog, his opening response is unrepentant and unambiguous: "My taste for bloodshed remains voluminous." The player pleads Murder Dog's case using a point-and-click interface by presenting multiple items of evidence, calling and cross-examining witnesses, and resting their case. Dialogue is presented to the player through a dialogue box, as well as a lower dialogue box for commentary by the small dog. The dialogue options in the game creates branching scenarios depending on the evidence that is submitted, although it is up to the player to either indict or attempt to exculpate Murder Dog for his crimes. For instance, Murder Dog can eat the evidence presented, destroy witnesses, and attempt to refute the evidence and witness testimonies presented, as well as attempting to murder the jury. Insanidade. Insanidade is a free video game for PC created by a group of 4 Brazilians under the name of Indie Arte. It is a very atmospheric horror adventure, inspired by Cry of Fear. Insanidade proposes an odyssey through a hostile environment of corridors, isolation cells, and the classic resources of a mental asylum, experiments, and what looks like human beings walking in a heavy way or looking at us still at the end of a corridor after leaving a room. All this using only the light of our cell phone to see in the dark. At the beginning of the story, we will find ourselves in one of the aforementioned dark corridors without any context. Beyond your mission, you are to find the one that killed the player's wife, leading him to enter into the shelter through a series of hospitals which seem to be controlled by a supernatural force that warps reality to convert this personal revenge into a collective hell for all the inhabitants. Funny Pizza Land. This is a game quite difficult to describe. To begin, its graphics section is deliberately ugly, combining a very indecipherable 3D that deforms with every movement of the characters. In addition to that, they are often combined with real images and handmade drawings, all on pre-rendered backgrounds that have a shocking color palette and sometimes makes the character lost in the background by that design. Now, the story is just as bizarre, in which we embody Pedro, a kind of strange-looking person whose pizzeria business wasn't going well. He makes the decision to travel to the home of the global media monster, which has a reward for its capture. There, we will find characters just as strange as Pedro himself, or even more so, which could help or stand in his way, posing a series of challenges that, besides uncomfortable, are very difficult to solve by that strange mixture of disturbing with comic. Besides that, the game is difficult to access because when it was created in 2010, the anonymous German creator decided to use a game engine that was from 2005. This makes the game complicated to execute properly if you play it on modern computers. My Child Lebensborn. My Child Lebensborn is a 2018 social simulation game developed by Technopilot for iOS, Android, and Windows. In it, the player assumes the role of an adoptive parent of a Lebensborn child, one of the children born under the selective breeding program developed by Heinrich Himmler in 1935, with the aim of expanding the Aryan race. Under this context, the game takes on a documentary character that places the player in Norway after the end of the war. But that does not make people forget. By adopting a Lebensborn child, Karen or Klaus as you choose, you have to deal with children and adults with a stigma incarnate. That everything that has to do with Germany is considered evil. You will be able to take care, feed, bathe, and play with your child, and at the same time, discover a story very close to reality. My Child Lebensborn has another level of responsibility. We are talking about raising a child, which will test your performance to exercise motherhood or fatherhood, and it will be impossible not to get attached to your new child so that all situations over which you have no control over will hurt you, almost as if it were reality. You will have to deal with a hostile society full of injustice, rejection, insults, bullying, as well as trying to explain to your child the reason why people are so cruel to him or her. There will be times when you feel despair and helplessness as your character's actions are limited, not only by his or her own personality, but also by the few opportunities he or she has in the context in which he or she lives. You will have to find a balance between work hours and parenting time, and understand that you do not have much support from other people and that your actions could worsen the child's situation. At the same time, you are going to work on forming a bond with your child, and all the decisions you make may increase or decrease their confidence and influence their feelings or harden their character. It is something that you will take very carefully and something that will make you reflect, because you must find a way to protect their childhood as well as find out the whereabouts of their real parents. Fear Effect. Fear Effect is an action and horror video game made for the PlayStation console in 1999. It was developed by Kronos Digital Entertainment and published by Eidos Interactive. One of the most notable features of Fear Effect is its gameplay system based on the Fear Bar. Instead of a traditional health bar, characters have a fear gauge that increases or decreases depending on their interactions and the dangers they face. If the fear bar is too high, it can have a negative impact on characters' performance, affecting their accuracy and skills. It is possible to recover health by performing actions that calm the character's heart rate. These include solving puzzles or hiding behind a guard to stealthily kill him. These acts will be rewarded with a health boost, which will bring the meter back to green. The game uses a visual style inspired by animated films, with characters and scenarios rendered in cel shading on pre-rendered backgrounds. This technique allows for fluid and expressive animations that stand out in the game, giving it a unique aesthetic that combines comic book style graphics with dark and detailed environments. Here, players follow the story of three mercenaries, Hana, Deke, and Glass, who embark on a dangerous mission in Hong Kong to locate and kidnap the daughter of a powerful Chinese leader. As the story unfolds, the trio discovers that there are supernatural forces and conspiracies at play, turning their mission into a fight for survival as they encounter none other than Hell's Gate itself. We will be involved in a struggle for the continuity of life on our planet, in a confrontation with the Guardian of Hell, who, along with his henchmen, will try by all means to purify the Earth. Devil's Tuning Fork. Devil's Tuning Fork is a creepy first-person adventure, and it's a game with no violence or overt conflict in the game. The story begins with a mysterious epidemic that causes children everywhere to fall into a coma. Yet unexpectedly, one child wakes up in an alternate reality. It is up to this child, the player, to determine the cause of the epidemic and save the other children trapped here. With the Devil's Tuning Fork, a magical instrument that allows the player to perceive sound waves, the player must find all the children and successfully escape from this alternate reality, thus awakening from the coma. The atmosphere is intentionally dark and claustrophobic, with no actual characters to interact with. You can, however, hear the disembodied voices of alarmed children, saying things like, "Please don't hurt me, I'm scared," and a threatening adult male voice snarling phrases like, "I'm going to kill you." Devil's Tuning Fork plays with the senses, using graphic echolocation and Escher-esque aesthetics. The player must collect stuffed toys that represent the trapped children, but must be aware that the sound can be misleading. Voices are heard from time to time, some from the adults that seem to talk around the child's body, others from children asking who is there and trying to warn the player that someone bad doesn't want him or her to save them. The sound comes from everywhere, and sometimes it is difficult to understand the environment. But there are also supporting elements such as bells that make the waves directed by the tuning fork reverberate more strongly, or mirrors and gongs that reflect the sound in different directions, and reveal new platforms to continue advancing. 1916, Der Unbekannte Krieg. 1916 is a game that takes a commonly explored time in our history and combines it with the very last thing you would ever expect, even for horror standards, in such a place. This is a short survival horror set in the trenches during World War I. Players control a German soldier shown from a first-person perspective with a single objective: locate a ladder to escape. The trenches are rendered in hazy shades of gray with lots of grain and the sounds of bombardments. The character finds out all fellow soldiers have been killed, and the reason soon becomes apparent. There are raptors on the loose. The player needs to guide the character through the maze-like environment, avoiding the raptors, and look for an exit. However, despite being overrun by dinosaurs and other hellish creatures, 1916 is not about fighting extinct animals. It's not about a soldier doomed to failure, and it's not about shooting before winning the war. It is about fear, and the words of its creators. As I said before, the aim of the game is to find the ladder to escape. Though at first, you may find yourself lost among the trenches, this is a game that needs you to remember the signs and paths taken. And yes, though there is a map, this isn't collectible, and you'll have to keep on your toes, acting like that if you were to fail, that's it, you're back to square one. Sometimes minimal storytelling and guidance can be a good thing, as it allows the player room for exploration and such, though some people may find themselves genuinely confused once they first start the game. It can take a little while to get the hang of it and understand how to approach it, especially with two hunters behind you. Dark Seed. This is one of the most terrifying graphic adventures that appeared in the golden age of point-and-click, programmed by Cyberdreams. The aesthetics of the game is inspired by the work of the Swiss graphic artist and sculptor H.R. Geiger, who based his art mainly on biomechanics. That is to say, living bodies inserted in some way or another in machines, in addition to a rather dark and, in many occasions, gloomy aspect. The game appeared in 1992, in full effervescence of the genre, quickly attracting the attention of the public for that distinctive aesthetic section. We put ourselves in the shoes of Mike Dawson, a publicist whose dream is to become a writer. To do so, he decides to buy a lonely mansion in a town called Woodland Hills. Mike is suspicious about the advisability of the purchase due to the low cost of the property and the fact that the sale would be done in a somewhat secret way. However, the secluded setting of the mansion and the beauty of the surroundings make him decide to make the purchase. After arriving the first day, he feels strangely tired and decides to go to bed. But hours later, he wakes up after suffering a horrible nightmare. But the nightmare will not entirely be unreal, as a seed of darkness has been planted in the deepest part of our brain, and we only have 3 days to find out how to stop it. Regarding the development of the adventure, Darkseed was not characterized by the complexity of its puzzles, but because in the game, we are permanently against the clock, since we only have 3 days to finish the adventure before the seed that we have planted in our brain gives way to an alien that will be born inside us, and, therefore, will kill us. In addition, although we can save the game, as is logical, we must be careful not to save it at a point where it is too late and does not give us time to complete the adventure. And as if that were not enough, one of the features of Darkseed is that we will travel between 2 worlds, the real world and the dark world. In the latter world, we must hurry, because if we take too long, Mike will feel extremely tired, and after falling into a deep sleep, he will die. Unlike most adventure games, which give the player time to explore, almost all actions in Darkseed have to be done within exact deadlines, or the game will end in an unwinnable state. It Moves. Developed by the Snow Owl team using RPG Maker after finally being released in February of 2014, this is a game about a kid and the monster under his bed. You play as a little boy who has a room of his own and sleeps in a bunk bed, which he and his older brother shared. Every night, he has a strange nightmare, and each one becomes more intense. A couple of nights later, it feels like there's something occupying the bottom bunk. Now you have to face each night and endure each new challenge. Bedtime is supposed to be a happy event for a tired child. For this child, it was terrifying. While some kids may complain about being put to bed before they finished watching a movie or playing their favorite video game, when he was a kid, nighttime was something to truly dread. A fear that, in his lifetime, I'm happy to say, has never been equaled. This story he will tell with all of you now shows his apprehension of falling asleep in that small, cramped, but strangely elongated room. It Moves is a horror game that will try to scare you without too many of the typical screamers, instead relying on atmosphere and suspense. You'll be solving puzzles along the way and encountering all manner of not-so-friendly creatures. Blameless. Blameless is a 3D adventure focused on puzzle solving and storytelling. Set in an unfinished house, the player is trying to escape a mysterious man. While you know how and why you got there, you cannot foresee that you were invited for a twisted purpose, and it's up to you to investigate what happened and how to get out. Playing the role of a young architect, you are tasked by an unknown man to help with some design decisions in the interior of his unfinished house. Accepting the legitimate request, you are taken to the house the same evening. Wandering about the interior, you notice a slight detail with your trained eye and turn to the man to tell him about bloodstains spilled on the floor. That's when you get hit on the head, falling to the floor, passed out. When you wake, the man's gone. Your phone is smashed and the only door out is locked. You are no hero, but there's no other choice than to investigate the strange whatabouts yourself. Looking around, your architect instinct tells you that you don't really need to open the door in order to pass through. You progress in your investigation as you solve laid-out puzzles, slowly uncovering the background of the events. The gameplay features cramped locations to boost the heaviness of the overall feel. The Coma. Dev Espresso Games brings us this 2D adventure. In the game, we take control of a high school student named Youngo, who is locked in a twisted version of his high school, where a monster that looks like his English teacher tries to kill him. Our goal is to get out of there alive, so we will have to be cunning to get out of that twisted world. There is no way to defend ourselves, so fleeing is our only option. To escape, we can run, dodge, hide in lockers, or even crouch in the hope that the murderer will not find us. It should be noted that when performing all these actions, we spend our stamina bar, so we must be very careful with this. The protagonist is equipped with a backpack that allows him to carry a total of 6 items. We also have a flashlight that helps us to illuminate everything around us. Another piece that accompanies us is the map, which is very useful. To get to know the story in depth, we have a variety of notes scattered throughout the Institute that reveal information about the different puzzles presented to us. That's why detailed exploration is so important. Although we must be very careful where we walk, as the school is surrounded by dangers. From monsters that poison us to bodies that fall on top of us, all of this presents a threat. Apart from the notes, we do have some consumables that help us in our adventure. drinks and food that give us life, or recharge our stamina to be able to continue fleeing in the right way, trying to get further and further away from the danger that stalks us at all times. Drowned God. This is a game released in 1996 and designed by Harry Horse, or Richard Horne, using a manuscript written in 1983. This manuscript seemed to be based on all kinds of topics related to the great mysteries of mankind: occultism, spiritualism, extraterrestrials, and, of course, the Illuminati Dome. When starting a new game, the vision that appears before us is already worthy of the strangest dreams. Through the eyes of an anonymous protagonist, the player finds himself in front of the Bequest Globe, a machine very similar to a gigantic clock that will end up becoming the main key to the game, as it will be in charge of transporting our character to the most hidden places in the world, both real and figurative. The first objective of the player, as obviously what happens in all adventure games, is to explore, or at least to discover the true purpose that the game has in store for him. Once the strange corridors of the central area are discovered, two mysterious figures hidden under avatars in the form of masks will expose before the player, and this will give rise to the rest of the game. Find and get the 4 mystical artifacts lost through time and space: the Holy Grail, the Staff of Osiris, the Philosopher's Stone, and the Ark of the Covenant. Using the Bequest Globe and unraveling the mysteries that hide its operation, this powerful machine will help the player to be transported to places very close to the objects in question, completely isolating each of the places and dividing the game into 4 very well differentiated parts. After getting each of them, the mysterious masked figures will have a small speech with the player, possibly the only support that will advance the main plot of the game. In each of these worlds, we will find several puzzles. Puzzles that are mostly closed, puzzles that can be solved without changing location, search for hidden objects, and all kinds of puzzles that usually flood adventure games. We will also find open puzzles, but almost all of them will be based on the same playable principle: obtaining various tarot cards and their subsequent use to unlock new areas. Throughout the game, the player will be presented with different themes related to the world of mystery and occultism, which in one way or another will serve as narrative support for the plot. These themes include aliens, numerology, occultism, Men in Black, Templars, the Illuminati, and even certain events or specific places such as the Philadelphia experiment, the Roswell incident, the Bermuda Triangle, Area 51, or Stonehenge. Finally, the game ends up following a very chaotic scheme, even with the need to separate the game into 4 parts to unite under the same title: both Aleister Crowley and Genetic Manipulation, through Einstein and Area 51. It is even easy to think that the only goal of the creator is simply to make a list of related topics and feed the player's curiosity in order to provoke him to seek information on his own and get information about the facts exposed in the game. Each of the 3 endings that the game gives us breaks abruptly with the plot, leaving us even more confused than in the beginning, with outcomes that tend to vary between incongruity and nonsense. Underparty. This is a short action game which focuses on violent combat, which usually ends with the protagonist dead in an instant with the slightest carelessness, as almost every enemy can mutilate her, throw her against a wall, or crush her with something else. The story, just as simple as the base game, follows a private investigator who seeks to rescue a kidnapped victim, infiltrating a criminal organization, until she is discovered, having to shoot her way from there to avoid dying. Amy. Amy is a survival horror video game developed by Vector Cell and published in 2012. It is a survival horror set in the year 2034, in an apocalyptic time where natural disasters occur very frequently and in which the Earth is plunged into various viral pandemics that cause people to become zombies. In this game, players assume the role of Lena, who must protect and guide Amy, an autistic girl with supernatural abilities, as they escape together from a zombie-infested city and confront the forces of an evil corporation. Lena's survival depends largely on Amy, as the girl can heal and has powers that can protect Lena from infection and help solve various puzzles. With a lot of mystery in between and very little information in our hands, Amy's story starts with the 2 protagonists of the game traveling aboard a train on their way to a hospital. Both seem frightened after having escaped from a research center of which no further details are given, although they are confident that things will get better. Or at least that's what they thought, because a sudden explosion on the horizon and a terrible train accident will unleash a real hell that they will have to survive by fostering cooperation between them. One of the central mechanics of the game is the management of the relationship between Lena and Amy. Players must ensure that Amy is not left behind or captured by enemy forces. In addition, they must solve puzzles that require cooperation between the two characters to advance. These puzzles often involve using Amy's special abilities to manipulate the environment or distract enemies. Visually, Amy uses a dark and somber color palette to create an oppressive and tense atmosphere befitting a horror game. The sound effects and ambient music also contribute to the sense of urgency and constant danger, immersing players in a post-apocalyptic world full of threats. Heart of Darkness. Heart of Darkness is a video game by Amazing Studio, published in 1998 by Infogrames and Interplay for Microsoft Windows on PC and PlayStation. The game begins with Andy, a boy who hates school and his teacher, but loves his dog Whiskey and is afraid of the dark. One day, Andy and his dog head to the park to watch a solar eclipse. During the phenomenon, Whiskey disappears, leaving clear evidence of a strange abduction. In a frenzy of childish imagination, Andy reaches his secret tree, where he keeps his inventions and rides in a spaceship, supposedly created by himself, to begin the search and rescue of his beloved dog. Without knowing how he arrives in another world, called Darklands, not without losing his ship along the way, he enters a world inhabited by creatures of the night and ruled by an evil sorcerer known as the Lord of Evil, an extremely evil and dangerous being. Andy must find for himself a way to rescue his dog, a way to return home, face his fears, and enter the Heart of Darkness. The violence of this title becomes remarkable when we take into account that we are controlling a child who can be mutilated, burned alive, crushed by the various traps of the stage, and even dissolved in acid by all the enemies that haunt the island. Haunting Ground. Haunting Ground is a survival horror game published in 2005 by Capcom. We are facing a game that will not present violent or bloody scares, thus basing its terror factor on the creation of a certain atmosphere and a series of circumstances in its narration that will make the player feel a very different type of tension to what he has been able to experience in other games. From the very first moment, the player will be disoriented in a game that is completely in medias res. Fiona Belli is the protagonist of this title and will begin the adventure trapped in a dog cage, half naked, and without knowing how she got to that situation. Her parents died in a car accident, and she had to go to a mansion that she had inherited. But the specific circumstances that have led her to her current situation is completely lost on her. During the first few hours of the game, Fiona rescues Huey, a dog that was in a deplorable state tied to a tree. From that moment on, with the help of her new companion, Fiona must try to escape from the castle by any means possible. Huey is a very well-designed and lively German Shepherd who will be of great help to us on many occasions. Huey can follow different commands from the player to perform actions like bark or growl when it detects a trap or threat. He can be ordered to stand still, follow her, attack, or go track an object. To maintain a good relationship with her new companion, Fiona must give commands to Huey, such as congratulating or scolding him, depending on whether he obeys her or not. Playing high fives and healing him every time he gets hurt will also keep his interest. If not given proper attention, Huey will ignore Fiona's commands and become distracted, and if mistreated frequently, he may even attack Fiona. Due to the weakness of the protagonist, a young teenager, we will not be able to face the enemies of the game. So our main task will be to flee and hide in the corners that the scenery provides us with. But this time, Fiona will be plagued by fear, a factor that will be essential, because if panic takes hold of her due to the excessive harassment of enemies, our chances of getting out alive will be drastically reduced, making it difficult to see what is happening on the screen, the terrified vision, and even the character will be frozen by terror or will act without paying attention to our instructions. Thanks to the great interactivity of the scenarios, we will have a wide range of possibilities, which means that we do not have to repeat hiding places more than necessary, which is very important because the longer we stay in the same place, or the more we use a certain place, the more likely we are to be found. Thus, the fate of the mansion will be in the hands of those who survive the nightmare fight in which Fiona was indirectly involved. Slide in the Woods. Slide in the Woods is a free game developed independently by Johnny's Games. It offers the player a short game, but with a high level of terror. In some aspects, it reminds us of Slender the 8 Pages, although concentrating the story in a single place for greater accessibility. It is a brief but intense horror game in which you will have to find and play with a curious slide placed in the middle of a sinister forest. During the day, it's all fun and magic, but when night falls, nothing and no one but yourself can save you from a scare to death. The controls are rather simple, since everything consists of moving the character around the stage and doing a few other actions. At the beginning, the playground where all the action takes place is displayed. There is only one object, however, that matters: the slide. The only thing you have to worry about is moving forward, being fast, not getting stuck, and picking up objects, such as a fleshlight or a sheet of newspaper. The slide holds the key. Many children and adults have mysteriously disappeared. The first few slides lead to nothing. Everything remains the same. But after using the slide several times, the situation changes. Bloodstains on the stairs indicate that something is going on. Seeing strange arms pulling on the sack where a person is apparently trapped, the fear increases. From then on, the nightmare becomes reality. Mogeko Castle. Mogeko Castle is a Japanese horror video game created by Deep Sea Prisoner in 2012 using the RPG Maker 2000 program. In 2014, the creator released a remastered version of the game, created in RPG Maker VX Ace, which is the best-known version due to its high-quality graphics and sound. Yonaka Kurai, anxious for her brother's return, takes the train to go home to see him. She decides to sleep to make the time pass faster, but when she wakes up, she finds a station called Mogeko. She is puzzled as she has never seen or heard such a station, so she decides to investigate the area a bit. Arriving in the forest, she tries to return, but a yellow creature appears out of nowhere. The creature says that it loves high school girls, and immediately calls out to more creatures just like it. Having escaped, Yonaka ends up on the outskirts of a huge castle. Left with no choice, she enters in hopes of finding someone who can help her. After entering, she is locked inside, and again, the yellow creatures appear. The little creatures reveal that they are Mogekos. One of them tries to catch Yonaka, but the others begin to argue over who will play with her first. Yonaka tries to take advantage of this and escapes to another room, and it is from there where she begins to enter the castle with the aim of returning to her world. Lone Survivor. Lone Survivor is an indie video game belonging to the genre of horror, which was originally released for Microsoft Windows and OS X in 2012, developed by Jasper Byrne at the company Superflat Games. An unnamed man in a surgical mask, referred to in the games as You, has been living in an apartment for an unspecified amount of time after a disease has turned most of the world's inhabitants into monsters, like mindless zombies. The man is alone and unaware of any other survivors. He dreams that he is on a stage and tries to engage in a conversation with a man with a box on his head, who never responds. After giving up that conversation, he drinks a cup of coffee, which causes the scene to change, and he is forced to hide from one of the monsters. Going beyond the stage curtain, he encounters a girl in a blue dress. Although he's asked her many questions, she never answers or shows her face. When he touches her, she disappears and leaves behind a flashlight. As the protagonist turns on the light, a man in blue with a gunshot wound appears laughing, and the dream ends. In the waking world, the man is out of supplies and is forced to explore for food, weapons, and other survivors. Following leads picked up from his radio, annotated maps, and discarded diary entries, the man explores his apartment complex with the goal to discover what the true state of the world is in. Remothered: Tormented Fathers. Remothered: Tormented Fathers is a third-person horror game inspired by classics like the first Resident Evil and other lesser-known titles such as Haunting Ground or Clock Tower. Thus, we will be trapped in a mansion from which we will have to escape while fleeing from an enemy from which we can barely defend ourselves. Rosemary Reed, a fascinating 35-year-old woman, reaches the house of a retired notary, Dr. Felton, who is affected by a mysterious disease. The woman is greeted by Miss Gloria, the nurse who takes care of the old man. When Rosemary reveals herself and her true intentions, the terrifying dread begins. Rosemary's investigations will bring her to believe that the disappearance of the man's daughter Celeste actually hides a terrible massacre. Dr. Felton and his wife, Ariana, could be the only ones who know the truth, including the secret behind Celeste's real identity and a fanatic cult of cloistered nuns in red. Mechanically, we do not control someone prepared to deal with the threat presented to him, neither physically nor mentally. We are not a police officer skilled in handling firearms, and we will not be able to shoot guns. We don't have a powerful physique that allows us to run long distances or exert great effort, nor are we mentally prepared to overcome the horror. Consequently, the only way to confront the enemies is not to confront them, but to avoid them and damage them just enough to continue. Our only defense tools will be everyday objects to throw at the enemy to stun or distract him, as well as defense objects to use in case of extreme necessity, such as scissors or knives. In addition, running will be clumsy and a dangerous action, because it will quickly leave us without strength to avoid enemy attacks or defend ourselves from them. We will be louder, and we will soon start panting from the effort, which will give away our position to nearby enemies. Claire. Claire is a survival horror video game developed by Hailstorm Games, originally released for PC and later extended to platforms such as PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Claire is alone, lost, and hunted. The world has quickly become shrouded in darkness with unseen threats stalking Claire from the shadows. Aided by her dog and armed only with a flashlight, Claire must conquer her fear and find her comatose mother. However, there are others lost in the darkness seeking salvation, and Claire must decide who she is going to save. With every choice, she'll begin to discover who she really is and whether she deserves to be saved herself. Penumbra Necrolog. Penumbra Necrolog is a third-party total conversion modification released for Amnesia: The Dark Descent in 2014 by Countercurrent Games. It was in development for 2 years, and it continues the storyline after the events of Penumbra Requiem, and like its predecessors, heavily focuses on exploration and survival. Philip wakes up in the computer room, apparently having survived a series of violent events. However, he realizes that several things have changed without him realizing it. Philip discovers that an expedition had arrived at the facility to rescue everyone inside, so he sets out once again to find the answers and finally escape with his life. However, things are not so simple. The facility is still plagued by those infected with an extremely lethal pathogen, and many similar dangers lurk within. From here on, Philip's fate is in the player's hands. Don't Open Your Eyes. Don't Open Your Eyes is an indie video game presented in graphic novel format. In it, you will meet a mysterious being in the middle of the night, and you will have a conversation. This will determine the development of the story. The playtime in Don't Open Your Eyes is a variable as fluctuating as its possible endings. The length of the experience will depend largely on how you respond and what choices you make against the creature. Generally, you will experience a game that can range from 30 to 60 minutes, providing an intense and concentrated session of fear and uncertainty. One of the strengths of Don't Open Your Eyes is the variety of conclusions the player can reach. With 27 different endings reported by its creators, the range of possibilities and paths to explore provides significant longevity to the game, as long as the player is willing to dive into exploring all the edges of this experience. It is an open game in which you will have to interact with a strange creature that will ask you to open your eyes. It is up to you to do it or not. That is, to decide if you believe it really exists or if it is a figment of your imagination. The consequences in both cases are terrifying. Visually, the game awakens a sense of being in front of a sketchbook come to life. Each stroke, sketched by hand, adds a unique character to the gloomy atmosphere of the game and uniquely complements the psychological tension of the story. This distinctive title adds personality and reinforces the immersion in the universe that Don't Open Your Eyes aims to build. It's up to you whether to open your eyes or not. It's up to you to believe if they're really there or if that whispering voice is only a part of your imagination. Just don't keep your visitor waiting for too long.